All right. So before we get into today's episode, just run through a couple things here. First off, the merch store is open. So if you want to grab some swag, a hoodie, a t-shirt, tank top, kid stuff, whatever, we got all kinds of stuff over at bigtruthpodcast.com /store. If you just go to the podcast, there's a nav stuff at the top. You just hit the store button and it'll bring you to a page. You click on that link and it'll bring you right over there. And so check that out. There's always like sales going on that I got nothing to do with it, right? It's just a merch fulfillment company. So check it out. You might get some stuff at heavily discounted prices. Also want to give a big shout out to all our Patreon subscribers. And if you feel like you want to support the show, check us out at patreon.com/bigtruth. It's that simple. There's a bunch of different levels of involvement, and they all come with their own entitlements and whatnot. Go to the website, bigtruth.com, for more information about the show in general. If you have a need for artwork, you got a hole in the wall that you want to cover up, you got some blank space in your garage or your tattoo shop or your place of work, your office, your cubicle, your cell, right? Whether it's padded or concrete, someplace in the house, you need some art, you need to check out Tattoo Flash Collective. Now, of course, if you have a tattoo shop and you're in the need of Tattoo Flash, you're going to check out Tattoo Flash Collective. But they don't only have Tattoo Flash. And Tattoo Flash actually does make rad wall art anyway. But they got posters, they got art books, they got all kinds of stuff. So check out Tattoo Flash Collective over at tattooflashcollective.com. If you use the promo code BigTruth at checkout, you get 20% off your order. If you have a motorcycle or into motorcycles or into punk rock and that type of stuff, you need to check out Chopperhead over at chopperhead.com, CHOPPAHEAD. We're a full brick and mortar motorcycle shop, full service shop. We do anything from an oil change to build you a full custom bike and anything in between. But we also have a store that you walk into with a showroom, a parts counter, and then the big shop out in the back. But we also have online stuff if you want to rep and get a hoodie or a hat or a t-shirt or something. Check it out, chopperhead.com. And that's it for today, right? I want to thank you all for listening. The show is going way longer. I didn't know what this was going to do. It's grown. It's gotten crazy. So I want to thank all the listeners from literally, like, it sounds corny to say bottom of my heart. I didn't think this was going to get where it has. And I want to keep this going and growing. So if you do me a big favor, right? You don't need to buy any merch. You don't need to subscribe to Patreon. If you do, you're the best. But if you want to really rep, just share the show. Share it with your friends, your coworkers. Subscribe to it. Hit the like button. Leave a review. But share the show however you can. Word of mouth. Send a link to somebody, whatever. Send the website, whatever you got to do. I appreciate it very much. And so without further ado, let's just jump into it right now.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
Yes, once again, we have liftoff. I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Big Truth Podcast. And once again, flying by the seat of our pants. At the extra table here at Chopperhead Custom Cycles, I'm here with my man Slick, who's an old friend of mine, who used to be one of the horn players in Kings of Nuthin, a legendary local Boston band. For those of you that don't know, go check it out on Spotify or any other streaming platform, or better yet, go find a vinyl. Or did you guys do CDs?
Yeah.
You did? Yeah.
Yeah, and ironically, the one album I'm on is not on Spotify. So you got to look that one up, Fight Songs.
Yeah. It's why is that one not on?
I'm not sure. I thought it was the label because Spotify pays the least out of any streaming service.
Yeah.
But then this actually came up recently.
This is important. So
yeah. But no. But it's plate of shrimp stuff. Like this is stuff I haven't talked about for 20 years in some cases. And me and Angela were just talking about this. And I was like, yeah, I think maybe Bomp, is just a little smarter as a label and cash strapped. And they're just like, fuck Spotify. We'll put it on the other platforms that pay better. She's like, no, the Conks are on there. And the Turpentine Brothers are on there. And those are on sub-labels of Bomp, just like us. So I was like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. I don't know why it's not on there. But it's not.
You might have to hit them up.
You got to look it up.
Yeah.
You got to look it up.
So is it on is it on like Apple and stuff?
Yeah. Well, I don't know where it's on. People can find it. I'm sure you can listen to it on YouTube or whatever. I'm sure it's out there.
Someone's bootlegged it and posted it up on YouTube for sure. If the label hasn't, someone's put it on YouTube.
You can find it. But it's just,
I mean, someone's put ITI 7 inches on fucking YouTube. So like, I'm sure those are that album's on there.
I don't have any of the original 7 inches. I have all bootleg stuff that I ripped off the internet years ago. Yeah. Otherwise, I wouldn't have like a complete ITI collection of music.
Doesn't matter. I can probably get you some 7 inches when I excavate my father's attic, which is been a thing for some people. Are like, dude, you gotta like. So many people are waiting to see the records I find, but that's a whole other story. So
give them to someone who's a real collector.
Yeah.
I'm more, I have some vinyl. I bought a bunch. Me and Vadim had a DJ night for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Which he told me was vinyl only. But after doing it for a year, I realized like there was a USB plug in it. Like I could have done it off of a laptop with, Awesome. But I'm glad it beefed up my vinyl collection a little bit, but I was never a collector like him.
Yeah.
I was always too broke. For me, it was always about like, can I have the music to listen to?
Sure. Yeah. Of course. That's the most important thing. Now, as someone who used to be a radio DJ when I was in school, and trying to do like a hardcore show with vinyl, that shit sucked. Because, you got some of these bands got 35-second songs. You got to be fucking nimble and fast. I could do it, but it's way easier to be a DJ now.
Right.
So, for people that don't know, Kings of Nuthin were like an interesting band because the only way to for me, you guys played with a lot of punk bands, a lot of rockabilly stuff. Like you guys could fit in anywhere because you were punk guys playing rockabilly stuff. Well, not rockabilly.
Well,
I don't. It's not rockabilly. It's just to me, it's just rowdy rock and roll.
Right, but it depends. Like I remember talking to someone years ago, talking music, and me being a big time music nerd, and having some friends that were super knowledgeable on music that really educated me on this stuff, and just telling him something about like R&B and doo-wop and stuff that, the other guys in the Kings of Nuthin got me into. And he was just like, well, I consider that part of rockabilly, no, actually, like if you know that era of music, it's not. Those are all kind of subgenres of rock and roll. But you know what? If not everyone needs to be educated on what music was like in the 50s, So it's cool if you want to do it like we did. Like to us, that was punk for back then. I mean, that's the roots of it. You certainly could find songs from the 50s, not whole albums, but individual songs that were as punk as anything that came out 20 years later.
Yeah.
And we were the type of dudes that were into that. And I think there was a lot of other people. That's why there was that whole rockabilly thing in the 90s. Like a lot of people were into it before it kind of imploded. Right at the turn of the century, basically.
Yeah, and when I said it, it was almost like a Freudian slip because I know a lot of people lump you into rockabilly, but I never thought of Kings of Nuthin as a rockabilly band.
No, we got lumped in
just like a rock and roll band.
We got lumped in more as a ska band or a swing band.
Which you don't sound like ska.
Well, if your definition of ska is a band with a horn section, guys who wear suits, who cares? Like, you came of age with like Nirvana and stuff. You don't have to go back and know what the shit actually is.
Yeah.
I mean, 18-year-old me, I would have been lecturing that person. Like, you don't know what you're, but now it's like, same thing with, I remember like the Bosstones were kind of local heroes. Like I knew about them in high school. I liked them. And then I started hearing Jamaican ska and I was just like, man, not that I was out saying, but like completely within my own head.
Yeah.
Like these guys aren't ska at all. What are they doing? And then years went by and it came like, wait, who cares? Like whether this is actually ska or it's more like just like rock and roll, like almost more like Chicago or something, but like a punk, like they're fun songs. I know all the words, fun, rowdy drinking songs, like a really good band for Boston in that era, like a big kind of happy party town, late 80s, early 90s, a couple years before I was there. But from what I know from, I had a lot of people that I hung out with when I first moved to Boston who were 4 or 5 years older.
Yeah.
That had been there for a couple years, you know. I mean, the Boston's were a big, like, symbol of that era.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the super aggro stuff was kind of over, and it was like something kind of positive, something fun, something that you don't have to, that may not scare people, but it's still good. You know, there's still some.
Well, then the other super aggro stuff came along. like what I loved about Boston, like back in the day, was that they would be like a rowdy hardcore show with like Blood for Blood have like rowdy shows, and then like you guys had rowdy shows, or like Boston's had rowdy shows. They were all different types of rowdy, but they were just fucking rowdy.
No, I like,
and that's missing from a lot of scenes. We were talking about this off air just a few minutes ago. And why I said while we're flying by the seat of our pants is literally this morning we were talking about some other shit. And I was like, "You want to do a podcast?" And like, yeah, a few hours later, here we are doing it now. So,
and literally, my wife was like, "Are you going to have anything to talk about?" And I was like, "If I hadn't been listening to this dude's podcast for 3 years, I know that has nothing to do with whether or not we'll have enough to talk about." Like,
there's always it's. I always look at it as like if we were like in a van going on a road trip, this is the bullshit we'd be talking about. That's how I look at the podcast. I don't prepare for any of them, so it doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
Right. And I was telling her, you know, I have like a unique perspective. I mean, it was a big band.
Yeah.
It was 8 or 7, 8, 9 guys, depending on the moment.
Yeah. When you say big band, you meant literally large number of people in the band. Yeah.
And you know, there was the core group that started it, and which I'm not a part of, you know?
Yeah.
So they started the band. I wasn't in the band, turned into another band. I was in the band. Then I was out. Yeah. Then it turned into the Kings of Nuthin. And, you know, and we can get into this in details later. And then I was back in again, you know? So I have sort of both sides of the coin perspective.
Sure. Yeah.
And you know, you knowing me, you know, this tickles my fancy. Like, if you look it up on the internet, there's no record that I was ever in the band.
Yeah.
Like Wikipedia or whatever, there's nothing about Slick playing saxophone in the band, which is exactly how I would want it.
Yeah,
like,
of course, yeah.
Like I have a weird mental hang up, like even with work and stuff, like, you know, we were talking about it the other day. I'd crush my enemies at work. You know, I did a career change. I've been so lucky to have fallen ass backwards into success after being so dead broke when I was younger. So, but then like, bosses will be like, "Oh, good job," and I'm just like, "Oh, no. Let's move on. Let's move on." You know, not like I'm so kind of the same thing with music. Like I always wanted. Sometimes the attention to stuff makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Which is weird. Like you're going up on stage, you're putting yourself out there. It's like, it's like I just need to get the music out.
Yeah,
it's not about me.
But also
attention at all.
And also you're in a group of people. Like people are there. They're not watching one particular person. They're listening to the music and reacting to the music. But
there's always a front man.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other skill.
Sure.
And some of the best front men, you know, they can be tough to deal with.
Yeah.
Like because of the ego, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There's also other front men who are super introverts till they got on stage. And it's like a Jekyll, you know, like there's a lot of nuances to it. But yeah, I mean, it is tough to deal with like rock star types. Oh yeah. I dealt with them with music and I've dealt with them at work now. But there's a reason. Sometimes that's how it works for them.
Sure.
Like, they wouldn't have any success if they weren't an egomaniac like they were.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's wild, and that's like in any industry, like you said, like whether it's what you're doing now or motorcycle chopper shit. Plenty of ego to go around in that world, music stuff. But before we go too far, sorry, I'm not used to drinking beer. Excuse me. And I don't edit the show, so you guys all had to deal with that. Everyone listening to this, I'm sorry. I'm not really sorry, but an important thing was what I liked. One of the things we were kind of skirting around that I like about bands like Kings of Nuthin is that it's not easy to define, and it doesn't exactly fit in the peg of any specific genre. Like, you know what I mean? It's just yes, in the general umbrella term of rock and roll, it fits into like that, like classic rock and roll. But I always find bands interesting that don't fit in any certain peg. You know what I mean? Even in like the punk side of things, like a band like Zeke, like you're like, what are they? Are they hardcore? They're as fast as hardcore, but they're different. They're not hardcore. Like
no, and I
like shit like that.
I think for the Kings of Nuthin, that was an accident at first, and then they embraced it.
Yeah,
and that was probably the best way for them to, put out the best shit they were possible of doing.
Yeah, because it's unique.
And it's just weird because like part of it, it's them, part of it, it's we. Yeah. Part of the time I was there, part of the time I wasn't.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, you were in and out.
Right. Well, right. And then, I'm thinking my ADD, your ADD.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it going to be the double negative multiplied, making it positive?
Yeah.
But maybe we can try to keep shit chronological.
Yeah, like that. We didn't even get into, like I was going to say, why don't we just get into the story of it?
Right, because fans, I think, don't know anything about this. Because it wasn't really publicized. It wasn't important for us when we were people in the industry who had succeeded were telling us, other local musicians who got good record deals and got big tours and were able to make a living at it were like, yeah, you guys are next. You're going to be the next thing. And they definitely had a point right before I got involved where they went from like opening local shows and it was the Bosstones hooked them up with the Hometown Throwdown.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they were headlining all over town and it was like, oh shit, this could actually
pop off. Yeah.
Right. And never considered like just how bizarre, like, the industry angle. Like I'm the worst possible. I could never work in the music industry. I don't understand how they do it. I'm not good at it. I'm way too much of a purist.
Yeah.
I don't understand promotion or
you got to be a used car salesman and look at it like you're a used car salesman but music is your product, not a thing. For not everybody, but like a lot of the big industry kind of operates like that. It's very superficial and whatever. Hollywood meets a used car salesman, meets whatever. But I think what's important, and the reason why I was like, we got to kind of get some of the story of Kings of Nuthin out there, because when the band existed, it was pre-podcast.
Oh yeah,
early stages of internet. You know what I mean?
Internet, yeah.
And so, unfortunately, tour passed. You know what I mean? So like a lot of stuff, like from a fan's perspective, they probably will be interested in hearing like kind of the story of the band, because there's still a lot of people. Obviously, we saw the numbers on Spotify. There's still a lot of people listening. So
hopefully, my little take on it, and it is my. Versus like the core guys, Tor and Necro and Liam. Yeah. Hopefully it's appreciated, because there's probably a lot of details I don't have.
Sure.
And I have one of the better memories out of the dudes in the band, but it's not flawless. Like there's shit people have told me about that I have zero memory of. So
yeah, of course.
I'll do my best. And there's with all bands, like happens on the road, stays on the road. Like there's so much that has to stay on the road with this band.
Yeah.
One thing
it's a wild band, and it's wild because it was like a wild band that was like still like in wild times, like wilder times. And
you would think like, they're wearing suits, they're pretty conservative, they're like a sailor, and like when the personalities involved, like and some of the weirdest, wildest shit. But definitely like listening to stories from other bands that were bigger. I thought the craziest shit happened to us because we were just operating on the bottom level of being a band.
Yeah.
Like, and, planning was terrible. There was no money involved. None of us had, like, out of the 7 or 8 of us, like we all had to work jobs. None of us still lived with their parents. Nobody had it. Like the drummer didn't have a van we could use when we started touring. Like everything had, like they had to, it was before I was involved, but they had to get a vehicle big enough to take the piano and the upright bass.
Yeah.
Because that was one of Tor's things. Like he wanted an actual piano, and he wanted, obviously upright basses were pretty common at the time. I mean, I was blown away the first time I saw someone play one in a rockabilly band in the 90s. I had no idea. I knew there was things like stuff called psychobilly from Europe and stuff. I had a little bit of an inkling. I'd heard but seeing someone play one in person like that, and especially when it was some of the guys, we had some really good bands in Boston.
Yeah.
Just local dudes. And, once Spike showed up playing with the Racketeers, I mean, he's one of the best guys on the planet for like rock and roll with an upright like that. Just blown away. And you're like, you don't ever want to see an electric bass in a band. I know a lot of people, they're just like orchestra bass, whatever. That's stupid. It's old fat. Like there's so many of us were just like, why would you play an electric bass? Why,
especially in a band like Kings of Nuthin.
In general, like when you see a master, just like seeing someone rip on an old chopper,
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, why would you rip on a dyno? When,
Yeah, yeah.
You know, look at that guy doing it on a pan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But someone just flew by. I went to the union meeting the other day, and the Union Bike Club was there. And I didn't even meet the dude, but I like let him into traffic coming out of the lot, and he like ripped by on a chopped pan. I was like, man, I should know that guy.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I haven't been in the union. It's only been a couple of years. So there's a lot of guys I don't know.
Yeah,
way
sure.
more than the guys I know.
Bro, I'm going to tell you something now. In Massachusetts, I used to know every guy on the chopper. And then now there's people that drive by this shop, and who the fuck was that? You know what I mean? Some kid on Sports the Chopper rides by the shop. I'm like, who's that? And why wouldn't they stop into a place that deals with choppers? But it's a different world.
Maybe
you know
eventually,
Yeah.
once they rip by a few times.
Yeah, I'm not upset. I'm not crying. You know what I mean?
Right,
but,
right.
but you know what I mean? It's just bizarre to me. You know, like whereas when we were younger, you know, and I knew you a long time from motorcycle stuff too. Like, you know, we went head first into the shit. Like,
Right.
We'd be at dumb meets in fucking Worcester or fucking outside of Worcester, wherever all those BIA meets were and shit. And like, and just hunting shit down and being stoked to be just around. And we'd go to Jim Burnier's shop in New Hampshire to fucking hang out. Like, never mind
definitely.
some motherfucker driving by this shop that lives down the fucking road. You know what I mean? Like,
and I did the same thing years before I even knew you. Like,
Yeah.
just when I first got my bike running, ride it up to Jim's place just to put miles on the motor. Hope he wasn't busy. Hope he wanted, you know, because sometimes he wanted to hang out. Sometimes he was like slammed with work. And stuff,
yeah.
You know, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get the, all right, boys, it's time to, and then you know it's time to wrap it up.
Ironically, given the podcast, I mean, that was why I took that bike off the road for a few years, because I was so busy touring with the Kings. Like, there was no time to ride. I had no place to keep it in Boston. It was up in my parents' garage in New Hampshire collecting dust. So the Kings of Nuthin interfered with my motorcycle career.
Your motorcycling.
In a huge way.
Yeah. So why don't we get into the story of the Kings? And I know, like, you know, I know there might be parts where, you know, like you were out and or not involved yet, or, you know, whatever. So there might be little things, but you obviously sat in the van. You guys toured Europe and stuff. Like,
right.
You've heard you even if you weren't there for some parts of things, you've heard about parts of things and stuff. So, yeah, why don't you kind of just get into the history of the band and then, you know, get into your involvement? Or actually, before we even talk about the band, why don't we talk about your history? Like, how did you, as being a kid from New Hampshire that grew up in the Flanders household, as you describe it, how did you find your way into punk rock and alternative stuff?
I mentioned that. So my mom's the oldest child. So I have an aunt and uncle that are just a couple years older than me.
Okay.
And I mentioned that whole Flanders thing to my uncle, her youngest brother, and he like lost his shit. He was like, oh my God, I never thought of that. It's perfect. That's exactly. Yeah, that part of the story is not that interesting. It's just, let me leave it at, let's say I'm a white suburban punk.
Yeah.
Just like you.
Yeah.
Well, so we'll pick up the story through, because I was such a fuck up. And you like, not in what you're thinking, not like being a drug addict or, you know. But I was such a fuck up when I was younger. I couldn't tell you how I managed to get myself into college, but I ended up going to college at Mass Art and not like being psyched to go live in Boston, like knew nothing about Boston, probably from trying to remember the way I thought when I was that young and naive.
Yeah.
Probably didn't like the city, you know, like it's dangerous. You know, everyone's trying to rip you off all the time, right down to like just getting parking tickets and stuff. Like the whole city, like I think I was a typical suburban type, especially New Hampshire versus Mass rivalry.
Yeah.
You know, New Hampshire being the one Republican state. I mean, at least back then. Now all bets are off, you know.
Yeah.
But so, you know, I'm living in the dorm at Mass Art, and I can remember like just out of sheer boredom, I didn't have any homework to not do yet. That came later. First couple weeks I'm there, just like, the hell am I going to do with myself?
Yeah.
You know, I had very, very little money. I was like, all right, I'm going to walk all the way down Huntington Ave and buy like a Big Gulp for $1, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, look at like, who do I tell that? Oh shit. I don't have to tell anyone. Like I'm actually an adult now, you know.
Yeah. Just newfound freedom, but dropped then, from New Hampshire into the city.
Right. And within a few
with freedom,
within a few short weeks, like there was a small, you know, you think the 90s, punk blew up, but it hadn't really blown up yet. So there was just a handful of people who were really into like punk, street punk type stuff, not alternative.
What year is this? Like
95, all 95.
Yeah, so like the 80s hardcore stuff into the early 90s had already kind of died down.
Right. But
This was like mid 90s was kind of a weird time.
Right. Yeah, probably Rancid had put out that album that first broke, and Green Day had put out at least the one, but it was still, I think for the most part, it was like alternative, grunge, Beastie Boys, like, and even being in a hotbed of weirdos like myself, like an art school, like there wasn't a ton of people into punk.
Yeah.
Like spiky jacket, dyed hair, and the few people that were there, like immediately, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
You coming to this show next week? It's like, there's a show, and within a few weeks, like the flickery light bulb, like Beavis and Butthead, went on over my head that all this shit I was into that nobody knew what the hell it was up in New Hampshire was all happening all around me.
Yeah.
I could walk to the Rat.
Yeah.
Shows were cheap, and the city was my skate park. I'm never been a great skateboarder, but growing up in a place where you had to like drive somewhere and I didn't have a car to like find shitty asphalt to skate on, and get harassed by the cops and like, cause they have nothing else to do, to go into a city that still, it was still like that late 80s crack epidemic mindset. I know it wasn't that bad in 95, but Boston cops did not give a shit about skateboarding.
No.
Unless you were right in some place that everyone was complaining about, like Copley Square or something, so that was like a Valhalla moment for me as a little fucking 18-year-old kid. Not even 18 actually, because, I think I turned 18. I was down there a month before I even turned 18.
Okay.
And like, holy shit, like this is, Yeah. So it was about a year later when my friend Pissy Pete, we got an apartment together rather than living in the dorm. And he ran into these people on the street that he had met in Western Mass who were all bike messengers. And we went over to their place in JP, which was like a commercial space. These kids did this with a bunch of places. They would like rent out. I don't know where they found them. Pete said they would like contact City Hall. They would see a building they liked and like write to find the owner. And I don't know if they were looking at ads for commercial. Basically, they were like, they weren't full on squatting, but they would like rent these places, say that they were going to open up a bicycle shop. And then they would all build these little cubicles that they lived in and like, build a mini ramp in the middle of it or something. And it was just like a nonstop party with those dudes. And they called it Project 13. And one of the dudes, that was Tor, his best friend, Mad Dog, this kid, Rob, another kid, John Bruno. Who else was there? There was another couple regular roommates. They were all bike messengers. And that was like my introduction to those dudes shortly there. And Pissy Pete's my oldest friend. He and I met in 9th grade. He went to photography school for a year. And then moved to Boston to get a place with me because, I was too much of a fuck up to like have my own studio apartment.
Yeah.
Like the opposite of what I am now. Like no work ethic. Like how little can I possibly do and get by versus, the work ethic I probably took a little bit too far the last 10 years or so. And I'm like, all right,
you make it up for lost time.
Now I gotta dial it back a little bit.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, that was the first time I met Tor, and Angela was so worried about like you're too hard on him, but I'm hoping that this comes across as like this is part of who he was and why this band happened the way it did and everything. But yeah, man, I thought he was an asshole the first time I met him. Like he was pretty standoffish, and him and like Liam and Necro, they were all squatters. I mean, they went and Tor was a suburban kid like me. So he went straight out of high school to, no home, no job, roam the country, see bands, whatever the hell else he did, do drugs, travel, see more bands, just absolutely unencumbered, like stuff that never would have crossed my mind to do, and I was like the weirdest kid, or one of the weirdest kids from where I was from. So, I'm sure to him, I looked just like we were saying, Rod Flanders. Who is this dork? But like, look at it from his perspective. Like compared to Tor, everyone is fucking Rod Flanders. He was one of the wildest dudes, and the rest of them too. And at that time, they were all bike messengers. Pissy loved bicycles. When we were back in high school, it's weird. but he was a big like 10-speed distance riding. It was like totally in contrast to anything else we were into when we were in high school. He loved that movie Quicksilver with fucking Kevin Bacon. So as soon as he ran into them on the street, and it's kind of a shame, I'll tell you a good Pissy Pete story. He was working in like a photo lab. It was like the closest thing he could get to like his career coming out of that shitty photo. It was like a photo school that you would go to for old people, middle-aged people like us. Stop calling myself old because I know real old people now. We're middle-aged. So it was like a place if you were going to work at Sears in their portrait studio. Okay. This is the school you went to get a job like that. Okay. And he almost didn't graduate because he probably should have gone to mass art with me. He probably would have done really well with that type. And, you know, after decades of being a truck mechanic, he's a photographer again now.
Oh, that's good.
Making it happen, you know, which is impressive because it's like the opposite of my trade where there's not enough people, you know, stuff like that. It's very competitive. It's very like self-motivated. So, so I'm proud of him, you know, because it's a lot harder than my career change, the career change he picked. So, but yeah, they made him wear a tie and like, he was so incensed that he had to wear a tie. I mean, that was common. I had to wear a tie when I was bagging groceries in high school. And I thought it was horrible because it's not like I'm going to business meetings. It was more like the way you make the butler wear a tuxedo to serve you and you can't get it dirty while you're doing house. You know, it was that kind of like a subjugation by a wardrobe. It wasn't to make you. So he went to the thrift store and found the ugliest ties he could find. Wore those every day. And he said he caught people like on the bus giving him dirty looks for these like really horribly ugly night. A lot of like 70s. Like he had a brown tie with like a gold, orange, and white sunset on it. And it was like 6 inches wide, you know. It was awesome. So he quickly ditched the photo job. And that's how I started riding a bike over the summers when I wasn't in school and hanging out more with those dudes. They lost that place in JP. They got another place in Chinatown in like an empty building. And I have no idea how they got this place, but speculating, like looking back, I think the landlords were like, all right, we can like pay security to keep bums out of this building, or we can let these crazy bike messengers live in there in like one floor. You know, because at the time I had no idea how they did it. And it was a different world. Like I'm still paying rent somewhere and they had this killer place. Eventually, maybe some people listening may have skated. One of the dudes built like a full-on skate park on the floor below for a couple of years before. I mean, it's long gone. It's been finally developed, but that was
this is when you could still do rad shit.
Yeah, this would have been like 97, 98. So it was all coming to an end, but we didn't know it yet. And just hindsight being 2020, you know, like, I don't know, you had like dudes that went to the Lower East Side in the late 70s, early 80s. We all know from what came out of there what a cool place it was. But, you know, Boston was a pretty cool place.
It was.
In a different way. And a lot of what we complained about, like the college kids, which I was one of. I mean, I think actually just looking back, trying to be impartial, that's what made it cool. That's why so many, like Boston's 500,000 people. New York is, you know, was what, 8 million back then? So, like that, you know, 16 times the size of Boston. And, you know, that's not counting, like with Boston, it's greater Boston and where do you draw the line? But it had a large musical footprint for how small a city it really was. And I think a lot of that, you know, we all hate it because they were the gentrifiers, but it was because of all the students that were there. And there was it was a great era. You know, a lot of it was when I was still in high school, but like the Rock City era with all the clubs out in all, like not the big clubs in Boston and Cambridge, but all these little clubs that had local bands headlining 5-6 nights a week and they were selling out. And, you know, that was pretty cool. And that was still kind of going on when I was there. I regret that I didn't live out in Austin because I was too much of a fuck up. It was too far from my school and I could barely make it to class, like from Mission Hill.
But living in Mission Hill back then, especially when the rap was still active, that was a good place to be, man. You could just, like you said, you could just walk right up there. You know?
When we lived up there, it was still pretty hairy, especially our first place.
Mission Hill used to be bananas.
It was still like So the first year I was there, when I was in the dorm, you could look out the back window on the Mission Hill projects, and there was like an ice cream truck driving around all night.
Yeah.
Never closed up. And like even idiots like me were like, yeah, they're probably not selling ice cream. You know?
Yeah.
And that was just every city in America back then. So yeah, we got a place, you know, our first place was in Fenway. We got a place up on Mission Hill. When they had lost, so the Project 13 kids had lost the place in JP. They'd moved into Chinatown, but it didn't have any heat yet. And I remember the first couple months that we lived in there, we weren't even trying to have a party, but like they had no heat. And Pissy told them we had heat, and they had a party at our house.
Yeah.
And it was the weekend the Rat closed. And so like 30 people were in my house, like 5 of whom I knew.
Yeah.
It was the first time I ever met Liam. And Liam was like, Liam was like a professional drinker.
Yeah.
And most of the time it was cool, but he had like the Jekyll Hyde thing when he drank.
Yeah.
So sometimes he turned into a different person, and he was, which one was the good guy?
Jekyll.
Yeah. He was Hyde that night.
Yeah.
But one of the funniest things, and I probably haven't mentioned yet, people may not know if they, tore constantly as long as I knew him from day one, 3 packs a day of like usually old golds, but the cheapest cigarettes he could get.
Yeah.
So, his lyrics about like coughing up a lung and stuff were just straight out of reality.
Yeah.
He never changed.
Which probably gave him his vocal tone.
Yeah. And struggled with it later, which, we'll get to, but I'll try to keep it chronological. So, cause I'm going to break the chronological right after I said it, but there's a YouTube channel I like, Uncle Tony's Garage. And it's he's a Mopar guy, but he's such a gearhead, like anything cars. He's into bikes and everything. He lived in New York in the 70s, and he's like, people ask me, tell me street racing stories, because he was right in the thick of all that stuff. I forget which expressway. For Boston people, something that's similar to like Storrow Drive or something, like they would just openly race at night in the 70s, and the cops didn't care because they had like murders and crazy stuff like
other
that
shit to deal with. Yeah, real crime, yeah.
Yeah, 1970s New York, So there for years, there was quasi-legal street racing on these expressways in Manhattan.
It wasn't legal, it just wasn't enforced.
Right. So he's like, people ask me for stories, and it's like, oh, tell me a story about when you ate dinner. Because there's that many nights of stories. Like, I draw a blank when I try, and it's the same thing. Like, there was so much zaniness with this band, and even with hanging out with these guys before there ever was a band, that it's tough. Hopefully that's where our ADD will come in, and I'll get reminded of things that'll remind, of crazy road stories. The other thing I learned from like listening to other musicians, I thought we had the craziest stories, but actually sometimes the bands that have the big tour bus and the money have wacky off the wall shit happen to them too. That I always figured they didn't because they had their shit together, but it really is just one of those, you never can tell.
Yeah.
You could have the best, like the movie Seven Samurai, the whole premise that like this was like the greatest battle ever fought, and no one knows it happened. That could be true for like the best band ever. Nobody remembers who they are.
Yeah.
Like Death, or we know about the band Death, the first, not the original Death, the first Death from the 70s.
Yeah.
Right.
Not the Death that got bigger. Yeah. Not the death metal band Death.
But how many deaths were out there that never recorded?
Yeah.
Like how many thousands? And this was like I mentioned earlier, guys like Spike and Liam especially like turned me on to a lot of music that I never would have heard of. But I was the guy, it's a proud thing. I turned them onto a band called the Sonics. And so I was like the fucking garage punk guy because most of them didn't listen to that. So, that's a whole genre. It's dominated by one-hit wonders. And like the more obscure the band, the better the record is going to be. Like, and it just seems to play out that way. Versus rockabilly, it's a lot of, Elvis did some of the best rockabilly ever. And it's a lot of the guys you've heard of do the best rockabilly. Garage punk, it's always like, we just discovered like Los Psychos from Chile. We just discovered this shit. No one's heard it since 1964, 65, 66. They did 200 copies of this in Waukegan. And it'll blow your mind. Like, there's probably a couple other deaths out there that they're lost to the sands of time. Same thing with tour stories. Tor the person and Tor the
Tor.
verb.
Yeah.
So where were we at? Being a bike messenger for a couple years.
You had a party the weekend the rack closed, and that's when
this is like a questionable story, but whatever.
It's a podcast exclusive.
Yeah.
No, podcast exclusive.
This is one of the ones, I don't know, but Tor was hanging out in my kitchen. Liam was passed out on the table. Like I said, I'd never even met Liam before. Tor's girlfriend walked in, and Liam's like dead to the world. Like shake him, kick him, like can't wake up.
He's out, out for the count. Yeah, he's the dude that would have gotten drawn on in any situation.
Right, like Wally.
Yeah.
So, girl walks into the room, starts talking to Tor. Just out of the blue, Liam snaps out of it, reaches up, grabs her right between the legs. She fucking belts him, knocks him on his ass, and he's dead to the world again on the table.
She woke up just for that.
Yeah. And I think she knocked him out. I'm stunned because I'm a lot more green.
Yeah.
That's the first time I thought Tor was going to die because he was laughing so hard he couldn't breathe because of how much he smoked.
Yeah.
So this is like one of the first, and like I said, first time I ever met Liam. And I ran into him. He was taking part-time classes at Mass Art. This is when I was actually still going. Ran into him. He remembered who I was, despite the state he was in at my house.
Yeah.
Different person. Totally different person. I was like, oh shit. No, Liam's cool. Liam's awesome.
Until he drinks, until the switch is flipped. Yeah.
No, most of the time when he drinks, he's just a happier version of Liam.
Yeah.
And
bro, you know what? Not for nothing. I 100% can identify with that. Sometimes I drink. Most of the time I drink, I can just be a happier version.
Right.
And then sometimes.
And that was a big part of the identity of the Kings of Nuthin was that we were an alcoholic band.
Yeah.
Not a drug band.
Yeah.
Not a straight edge band, which I think, was I talking to you about that like a couple weeks back? Like no one probably just knowing the music or fans of ours back then would ever think that anyone involved in the Kings of Nuthin was straight edge like I was.
No.
Like when I was younger, so at the time of that party, I was a straight edge kid.
Yeah.
I didn't keep it for life.
Sure.
And it's stupid. It's whatever. It's not even worth getting into reasons like total respect if you think it's for life, total respect if it's not.
Yeah.
I'm a diehard individualist.
Yeah.
So
At some point, it just wasn't for you anymore. So
right. But I still definitely had like the thinking straight mentality.
Yeah.
Even if I was drinking with those guys. So that's why we were talking about we turned the mics on, like me being the guy holding the money and stuff,
and
running the merch booth.
Every band needs the responsible guy,
right?
That keeps things on track, keeps things moving.
That became me a little bit later on. So, all right, around the time we were living in that place, that was the other thing I decided. I had some money that my parents had set aside to pay for college, and I calculated that I had a few thousand left over. So I thought it would be a good idea to buy a motorcycle. And I was looking for something mechanically simple, for someone who never, it was you who made me appreciate Harleys years later when we met. Like I had no interest in Harleys back then. They just didn't appeal to me at all. And a lot of it was.
Most of them don't appeal to me either. So don't worry about it. Some of them, the ones I like a lot. That's
a lot of it was, there's a lot of Harley culture.
Yeah.
There's.
Most of which does not appeal to me at all.
I can remember a guy posting about it. I'm sure it was on the Brit Bike forum, 20 years ago or something.
Yeah.
But him talking about people he worked with, not understanding.
Not into the Brit Bike guys either. You know what I mean?
but Brit Bike, they were so popular in the States in the 60s and 70s. And they were by the time we were buying them in the 90s, they were forgotten. People didn't even know what they were.
But that's what I loved about it. You could buy bikes for $400 or $500.
But this guy was talking about people he worked with didn't understand the weird crap he was into, and they were like, "If it's not a Harley, I won't even look at it." And these were guys who had never ridden a bike.
Yeah.
And that was why what turned him off to people like that. And that was probably plus Harleys were expensive in the 90s.
They were. Even shovel heads, all that stuff was
Brit stuff wasn't. Japanese bikes were free in some cases.
Pretty much free, yeah.
They were,
I can't even count how many times people would give us a bike or $25 or something.
Right.
No, those bikes are worth money now. I wish
They
I
are.
kept them. You know
They
what I mean?
are.
Like it's wild.
Yeah, but I know I didn't have the skills because years later, Pissy had one. And without getting too, well, you know, whatever, it's your podcast. It was one of our other friends, Tony, who's in the Altar Boys. It was like his parts bike.
It was a car club. Car club
yeah.
for people that don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Local car club.
They can look it up. Just like Bite Songs, the album. They can
Well, no, I don't want people thinking he was like a literal altar boy.
Well,
yeah. Could have been, I don't know. But.
That's coming right up in this because that's one of the funniest, awesomest things that happened. Like with our little circle of friends in the 90s was, you know, the original car club splitting into the Stumbling Idols and the Altar Boys, and like the way the logos worked out and the cars that were like, it couldn't have been more perfect. Like each side was exactly what the other side like made fun of them for being. I mean, so that's coming up. And anyway, me, Mad Dog, and Pissy had to get into this bike's motor because the cam timing was off because it's a dual overhead cam with like a cam chain.
What was the bike?
CB450.
Oh, okay.
So that's why the 450s, like when the Japanese bikes got hip with a certain crowd in the 90s, who I guess was turning them into like cafe racer bikes. But yeah, it took all three of us and a bunch of safety wire and stuff to get the chain apart and then rotate the kit. Like it was such a pain in the ass compared to anything that I ever had to do on my BSA or my Triumph.
Yeah, yeah.
So I definitely did not have the skills when I was 19, 20 with my first bike to deal with, you know, because I'm sure my first bike, it was a lemon. Like it needed a total engine rebuild.
Sure.
From, you know, and I wouldn't have been able to hack that with a Honda.
Yeah.
So,
what was that bike? Just because you didn't
the redheaded stepchild of British bikes, 71 BSA Lightning.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I love to death. I absolutely love that bike. So, and it's good. I'm tall. Like the oil and frame is fine for a guy with ridiculously long legs like me.
Oil and frames are good handling. Good handling bikes.
Sometimes I wish I had never bought. I mean, right now, you know, I just have piles of parts that
you have three project bikes going on. Yeah.
Going on is maybe not, but the frames are there. Some of them have motors, you know, et cetera. But sometimes I wish I just hung on to that BSA because I could have made it into any bike I wanted to by now.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of just taking like something that's not cool, that's not hip. It's not cool with people, but it's a cool bike or car or whatever.
Yeah.
Make something cool so that you can get for cheap.
And that was what
you
was
make
cool
something cool out of it.
Yeah, especially in those days, like you said, like we could get British bikes cheap and turn them into something that we wanted to do, like custom. Like you went more.
That bike was just a rider.
Yeah,
I never got into with that bike. I never.
No, but I'm just saying, like me and Jay went more chopper. You kind of always kept things a little more traditional or cafe.
I loved like when I first saw. So I didn't know a whole lot about bikes. Even when I bought that BSA, I just knew it was going to be simple, like a Triumph.
Yeah.
So that's what I bought it on. I would have had a lot easier time had it been a Triumph, not a BSA. It wasn't a huge difference in price on them back then. It was just
but it was the availability of parts and stuff like
but I mean,
Triumphs were a little easier to work on. BSAs were a little bit.
But that was kind of my in with Jim Bernier, because I found him, started buying parts from him, and you know, listeners don't know, but Jim was a guy who back then there weren't a lot of. I mean, there still aren't a lot of like real old school Brit shops.
No,
I mean, how many do you think there are in the States? A dozen?
If there's a dozen, but there was more, but like they're closing more rapidly as you know, with like critical mass is building as you know what I mean, like as the years go by, you know,
this is an era,
less and less,
like as far as bikes, it was pre-internet. Like I know the Brit Bike Forum was up there, but shops didn't have websites. You couldn't buy parts online or anything.
It was definitely harder. Yeah, you could get like you know, like what was like British the place British only or something. Like there was a couple of
the mail order places.
Mail order places, yeah. But you had to like seek it out, yeah.
But yeah, I was lucky enough. You know, he was an hour north of.
But that's what I always go into, just not to think, but like that's what was cool about shit back then. Whether it was punk rock stuff or motorcycle stuff, it was almost like arcane occult knowledge to find it, and you had to hunt it, and you had to be really vigilant and really want it to. No,
especially with the Brit bikes, because people just turned their backs on them when those companies, when Triumph and BSA and Norton went out of business. Like no one wanted those bikes.
No.
You know, and nobody knew how to work on them. I don't remember if it was online or if it was in Vintage Bike, but John Healy was talking about, because he had a dealership. John Healy does Vintage Bike Magazine, and Coventry Spares, which is a supplier.
I know you get bearings from today. I talked to John today.
Right. I don't know if there's anyone on the planet that knows more about Triumphs than John. No. From what I can tell.
And that motherfucker's in his 80s, and he just went through all kinds of surgeries and stuff, and he's still working. I can
remember reading, I don't know if it was in his magazine or just, he was active on that forum. I mean, he was just constantly helping people fix their bikes at home.
Yeah. And he's also the head of like the Vincent Owners Group or something like that.
He was talking about with his dealership when the factory went under and they couldn't get parts. You know, people were still riding Triumphs and stuff, and like they couldn't get valves, pistons and stuff. So they were, you know, and he's like, we think they're kind of rare bikes now. Like they sold hundreds of thousands of them in the 60s. Yeah. We bought them all. Like we would have to break a motor down to sell someone a set of pistons.
Yeah, yeah, to get the parts. Yeah,
just because you know you've got however many thousand miles, you need to go 20 over on it now. Okay, well, yeah, we're gonna have to go find a bike with 20 over. Like that's what it was like for probably from when they went out of business in the 70s, for probably 10 years before an aftermarket kicked in.
Yeah.
And you know, I would assume, I don't know the story of how he went from owning the Triumph dealership to Coventry, but I think he was one of the guys that helped make the whole British aftermarket happen. Yeah. Find places to manufacture this stuff, you know, et cetera. So
hold that point. I drank 3 beers. I gotta go. I'll be right back. I'm gonna pause this. All right, we're back, and let me just clarify something before we go on. And I know exactly where we left off, but because I know people are gonna take things wrong, that especially if you're a new listener. When I said like, "Oh fuck that shit," or I don't like any of this. I love motorcycles. I love custom motorcycles. I love riding motorcycles. I just don't like a lot of the culture around it.
Oh yeah,
I like my own little weird subculture. I like my friends, you know what I mean? But
there's like not one Harley culture. There's
there's multiple. Like a million. Yeah.
So,
but even in something small like the chopper world.
Oh yeah.
There's fucking strata in that world, right? You know what I mean? There's like.
You remember the video from like 10, 15 years ago that type to text, and it had the little animated guys, and it was like the Born Free type dude out in California talking about his period correct chopper and how he didn't do the motor work because he had $200 jeans. You never saw that?
No. But
well, the follow up to it about the cafe racer scene is just as funny.
Yeah,
so if you go on YouTube and look up Legend of the Cafe Racer, it's like 15 years old at least at this point, and it's still hilarious. And it's just all about like when the public discovered these things and everyone became an internet expert overnight.
Yeah, it's wild. But you know what? Here's the thing. You know what I love? I love motorcycles, and I love people that genuinely and really love their bikes and love motorcycles and are real about it. And I don't care if you got 3 years into it, fucking 6 months into it, fucking your gray beard, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, just be about it. And otherwise, fucking kick rocks. Fucking keep moving. You know what I mean? Or don't. I don't care. But, you know, I just don't need to fucking deal with it.
Well, and that's literally how we met, because I stumbled, you know, right after my time in the Kings of Nuthin, I stumbled across something on the internet talking about this place, Chop Ahead, and it might have been on BritBike.com or something. So
no, dude, I feel like I seen you guys with you playing. Did you join? Did you get back in? Did you do any reunion? No. Like not reunion, but like reunion with you?
No.
I definitely saw you play horns. Well, I probably before I knew you.
Maybe before we met.
Maybe before you know, yeah.
Like I know I heard about the shop. I looked at the website. You had your own forum and stuff. So I'm reading the posts on the forum.
I remember the forum, dude. I haven't thought about that in years.
Yeah. And I realized like, oh shit, like these guys are local. I think someone had mentioned it. Like I knew it was a local shop.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh wait, these are actually dudes my age. Like at the time I think I was 26, which is like really about 50 years younger than the typical person who was into Triumphs.
At that point, we were the young dudes. Like we were all the young dudes, which was cool because people like a lot of the older dudes like were stoked and would bring.
But you and I had the same thing. We were just like basically hot rodders. Like it didn't matter if it was a chopper or a cafe bike or there was almost no one doing it back then, but like street tracker or any type of customization that made the thing faster or
cooler,
just more of your bike versus, you know, and especially if it was something, like I said, like now it would probably be Sportsters. I mean, something you can get for cheap that you can make something really cool out of.
You know who was a cool motherfucker back then? Do you remember that dude? His name was Jim, and he had that wild Triumph chopper, the War or something.
No, maybe
he had the same last name as me. His name was Jim. he had all like he was fully sleeved, but with like weird flames and shit. I can't remember the name of his bike, but it was like a fucking insane Triumph chopper back then. But he was an anomaly. He was another younger guy like us. He was maybe a few years older than us.
Yeah, maybe I never met him. I don't know.
I'm sure you did. You would have, because he was at all the.
We were talking about it. Like, there's crazy shit that my friends and family were like, "How the hell do you remember that from 25 years ago?"
Yeah.
But it's not flawless.
No, I'm like that. People tell me stories all the time. I'm like, I have no recollection of that. They're like, you did this and this. I was like, don't remember, but probably better.
Yeah, I mean. So we figured out when we took the break that we're already an hour in, and we haven't even gotten to the point where the band has started, and not even the Kings of Nuthin, but the first band that turned into the second band that turned into the Kings of Nuthin hadn't even started. So we're in the time frame. Like,
we're talking motorcycles. There's people are stoked. They want to hear about shit.
Oh yeah. Plus, I mean, this is the way you run your podcast. Like,
it just goes all over.
Yeah, we're gonna.
It'll eventually come back. I'll keep it on track.
So when I know. When I was living in that apartment on Mission Hill on, I can't believe I'm spacing on the street name now, right across from the church on Tremont, which was pretty hairy at the time, but it also wasn't, there's a reason it was gentrified a few years later because it was never as dangerous as the reputation was.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, I guess, the story of every place that was gentrified.
Yeah.
You know, because, me and Pissy were not the toughest dudes. Like, we weren't the wimpiest dudes. I mean, there were kids I went to school with at Mass Art that got robbed walking to their house on Mission Hill, but we just weren't like the weakest, slowest of the prey. But I know that's when I never heard them, but Tor talked about Mad Dog playing drums in a band, maybe in that first place they had in JP, and Tor had gotten himself an upright bass. Cause like with this is another kind of anomaly, rockabilly revival of the 90s. Like the order of like the coolest guy in the band, singer, guitar player, bass player, drummer, like the upright bass upset, like you jumped up, you surpassed the guitar player.
Yeah.
Cause so many of us were so blown away. And like I said, we had a couple real good players making it look really good. So Tor picked up on that right away, and got himself a bass. And I know there was another story I might have forgotten, but I thought of it just a few days ago, having no idea we were going to do this. The way he got that bass, I guess him and his buddy Rob, one of the kids that lived in another Messenger, they were trading, like, I wasn't there, but I remember the story, it being like some crazy, like a Primus bass, like a fretless 6-string.
Yeah, some weird,
some stuff they were never going to play. And it's still kind of hard to find upright basses, but it was really hard back then to find any place that even had one. And there was a music store on Elm Street up in Manchester, New Hampshire, not far from where I grew up, where they had one in the store and they worked out a deal. They scrounged barely enough cash because, I mean, those guys never had any money. Like, they made more money than I did because they were messengers. But whereas, when I was still working retail, like for $6
well, when you got a 3-pack a day habit on top of everything else, that's expensive. Well,
I remember Mad Dog saying for a while he didn't drink anything but beer while he was a bike messenger. Like, I don't know how that's physically possible. But he didn't drink water. He didn't drink soda. He drank nothing but beer all day at work, went home. And beer is more expensive than water here.
Yeah.
It's the opposite in Europe, I found out, but that's later in the story. So they had that band. By the time I found out they had a band, they had met this guy, Ray, at Home Depot in Andrews Square, which was open 24 hours. They were there looking for something to fix a car. And Ray was there. Yeah,
that was the Home Depot behind my apartment.
Yeah. And it was one of the few, and Andrews Square was pretty sketchy in the 90s. So to have a 24-hour, like, it must have been cool. It must have been just cool to go down there.
There were nights, like there was a night me and Seamus, the esoteric, walked home and we had to step over a dead body to get back to. We're like, whoa, fuck. Yeah. Just on the pavement in front of them. Like, oh shit.
Right. So they met this dude, Ray, who is, Ray from Chop Ahead Volume 1, maybe?
Yeah. Ray, yeah.
So Ray was the original singer of the band that they eventually ended up calling the Saturday Night Specials, which is the genesis. And I still have their demo with Ray singing and Mr. Green on guitar. I mean, I still have it on cassette somewhere.
And Tor was upright bass?
Yeah.
And Mad Dog was on drums?
No, they had gotten Liam at that point. So
Okay.
Liam was involved. Tor was on bass. I think it was probably just Mr. Green, another friend of ours who was a bike messenger. Who was like an older dude, really a strange guy. When I tell people, and Liam agreed with me on this because I brought it up like recently for middle-aged people. Within the last 10 years, I had a conversation with Liam. And Mr. Green, basically picture Miller from Repo Man.
Yeah.
That was Mr. Green.
Okay.
So I know when they played live, they had a second guitar player, but I mean, he was a killer guitar player. I don't know if they had anyone else on that demo tape.
Okay.
And that was maybe half the songs on the first EP are songs they wrote with those guys. Like Mike Green wrote the music and Ray wrote the lyrics. And the one that remains more or less intact with Ray's lyrics is Miss April. For
Okay.
people that are into that first. I mean, I love that record.
Yeah.
And we'll get to
it. Yeah.
There's even more of a story and a drama behind. So they had that lineup.
And that was still Saturday Night Specials.
Right. That quickly went sideways somehow. And I just remember Ray saying it was because Tor wanted to bring friends of his who were bums, like legit homeless dudes that he knew from Alston, up on stage to place trash cans like drums. And it's like, and it was like years later, it was like, I think we ran it. I mean, when did you do did you do that DVD the year you and I were at that Weekender in Vegas together? Or was that the year? Doesn't matter. It was like, I talked to Ray about that around that time.
I started that DVD filming that in like 2003.
Okay. So it might have been the year before, but because I don't
know if that was the year me and you went or the year me and Keith went and all the crazy.
Either way, it would have been, many, when Ray was singing for them, it would have been 97, 98. And when I heard the story from him, it would have been when he lived in Vegas, which was at least in the 2000s.
Which is when I talked to him. Yeah.
So, but I knew exactly who he meant immediately because there were these guys that lived in like campers, like the dude from National Lampoon. Lived in their campers in Alston in the days. And of course, Tor was like buddies with all of them. One of these dudes had like a 51 Hudson or something that he had parked behind his camper that years later we thought he was like such a badass for having this Hudson, but it slowly deteriorated over the years of us knowing him. So it turned out he didn't like build it, and he probably inherited it and it just slowly degenerated under him owning it. But I know exactly the guys that Tor wanted to bring on stage to play drums on upturned trash cans. And like, that's
would have been a mess.
Yeah. So whether that was literally the reason that Ray quit or who knows? Who knows? Yeah. But believe it or not, with these crazy fucks, things went sideways. So, and the second guitar player I had a band at the time, which had kind of evolved out of my band in high school, and it was me and my little brother on drums, which is like crazy how lucky I was to have a brother to like have my back. And it was like a crazy good drummer. And we were doing, it's kind of like what was so cool about Boston. We were doing like a surf punk thing. So it was like 90% instrumentals, but like we played shows between that and the bands that it evolved out of in high school with my friend Andy, rest in peace, playing bass. The shows we got for having like no connections, not even the shows, but just the bands we played with. Those little two bands, like we didn't play a lot in Boston. I didn't know people who booked shows. I don't think I understood that, and I should have, that like some of the kids at the shows, you could just talk to them and get booked on a show. I think I was still kind of thinking you had to go into a studio and record a demo and give it to like someone who worked at the club. Kind of like I didn't understand how and I don't know why I was so ignorant to it because I had all the means at my disposal. I did talk about what a fuck up I was as a teenager. So, but I played with, through some of those, my friend DCB that I went to Mass Art with, who I know Mark and the guys from the Unseen, some of the first people I ever met in Boston, they were good friends with me. One of the best dudes ever. He got me a show up in New Hampshire with his friend's band and the Casualties. And we played another show with Showcase Showdown up in New Hampshire. We played with Blank 77 a little bit later, and this is we're doing like instrumental surf.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like the Kings of Nuthin trying to do kind of authentic music and failing at it. Like I definitely set out to like try to sound like Dick Dale, but just my background was like minor threat and Black Flag, and so that came through almost immediately. And I mean, the 90s were kind of a waste of time, just like every other decade. But the cool thing of it was that like people were a little more open-minded and weren't like, what the hell is a surf band doing playing a punk show?
Yeah,
they were just like, all right, anything goes right now for a couple years,
Yeah.
Whether it's punk, street punk, hardcore, surf.
Yeah, metal, whatever.
I mean, that's where a lot of people, everyone in the rockabilly scene in Boston were old punks.
Yeah.
I know it was different in other parts of the country, but everyone, because I knew not a lot of people would necessarily remember me from shows at the Rat. It was a bigger scene, and I just didn't. I'm socially awkward. Like I'm not good at meeting people. But the rockabilly scene was so much smaller. I knew like everybody.
Yeah,
and pretty much everyone was about the music,
or even like the Abbey Lounge, like.
Well, that was the same
garage punk.
That was the same group of people.
Yeah,
literally, like almost. There was a little bit of changeover, but that was almost everyone. Those were the same people that I saw at rockabilly shows a few years earlier.
Yeah,
transitioned, and it's it's the same music. It's punk and rock and roll.
Yeah.
So, all right. So Ray quits.
Yeah.
The second guitar player, Ghosts. We got our friend Kef, another bike messenger who was a little bit older, and I think not in the bike messenger lifestyle by choice. And at this point, I'm still trying to be a college student, trying to like go to class and like, not doing so good at it. I made a lot more money during that year to do things like buy BSAs.
Yeah.
I failed a bunch of classes and got put on academic probation.
Yeah.
And hanging out with these knuckleheads. So Mr. Green would randomly stop playing in the middle of songs, and they didn't know why. And there was like no way to reason with him because, like I said, picture Miller from Repo Man. And if you don't know who I mean, go watch Repo Man.
Yeah. If you haven't seen Repo Man, if
you haven't seen it lately, watch it again. Yeah, because it's one of those movies that you can watch hundreds of times and
still catch it. Yeah,
yeah, you're gonna pick up. So that was where I came in.
Yeah.
They knew me, and at that point they had changed the name to the Boston Blackouts, which was. Previously, there was a famous.
See, I don't remember Saturday Night Specials, but I remember Boston Blackouts.
Yeah, see, we've never talked about when you were in Boston versus when you went out to Arizona and when you got back and stuff.
Well, so it was weird because when I was in Arizona, I still came back. You know what I mean? But I'd only be back for a little bit or vice versa. I went to Arizona. I was there from 95 to 98, 99.
So right in that, yeah. But you would have been back right around the time things were starting up.
Yeah.
But
then I was gone a year in Atlanta. And then I was back.
Well, so you might have caught some of the stuff they were doing. Yeah. Because I'm trying to think of the time. I think once the Saturday Night Specials broke up, I think by the time it was Boston Blackouts, they had brought me in on second guitar. But I only played 2 shows with them.
Okay.
One of which I thought was going to be my 15 minutes of fame because I'm like this hyperactive fucking ADD kid. And, we weren't like the Kings of Nuthin became a really good group of musicians. We were not when we were at the Boston Blackouts.
Yeah.
Like we had 6 or 7 songs, most of which had been written with Ray. And then we had to write
Yeah.
I don't know who would have written the lyrics, if it was Kef or if Tor had gotten involved at that point, but someone wrote new lyrics so that we weren't stealing Ray's lyrics, except for Miss April. And yeah, I did the 2 shows, and there was at one point where Mike just completely stopped playing for no reason, and I all right, shit, I got to do a solo now. But all the songs were in E. We had like 8 songs, all in E.
Yeah.
So I'm standing there, literally EAB over and over again. And I got bored and did the same type of shit I did with my surf band, like climb on things, go into the crowd like Iggy did, and not by design. You would know, like, I remember reading at some point about, and I don't know if it was about LA or Chicago, but like Latino gangbangers, like
LA.
Go Loco.
Yeah.
Well, no, but I mean, there was the whole, like, there's a Chicago version. There's like,
yeah.
I don't remember which one it was referring to. And this is just me nerding out. Like, what difference it makes? But you've heard the term Go Loco.
Yeah.
As like a controlled, like, berserker type. Like, you just kind of turn it on and hope that you can turn it off when, like, you have to fight people or you're outnumbered or, you're going into a hail of whatever. That's my approach as a teenager to music. Like, I had no idea what I was going to do on stage.
Yeah.
But I would just, like, turn it on. Like, all right, I got to turn on my music. And so sometimes that would mean not much, like just playing guitar and people were into it. Sometimes it meant I was like knocking over the whole drum kit, standing on the bass drum. Sometimes it meant I was out in the crowd with my guitar, like, and it was probably a little weird that this was like mostly instrumental, but so I'm doing the same kind of stuff. And I found myself on top of the piano on the far side of the stage from where I had started, and the song ended. And so I just jumped across the entire band back to my spot. And all the dudes, like, who I didn't know at the time, but like Spike and Dana and Pat, like the dudes from the Rocketeers that we were opening for, like, for at least a year, I didn't know any of them. And they were like, oh shit, you really do the jump off the piano.
Yeah.
So I was like, I think I might have hit my peak here. Like, I'm just going to be,
that dude. I'm that dude. Yeah. The piano guy. Yeah.
Right. So, like I said, that actually only ended up being 2 shows. And then they got a new, Kef was not into it. Kef, like I said, was probably just more of a regular guy who was a bike messenger because he'd lost his driver's license. Didn't want to live in this crazy fucked up squat. It wasn't fully a squat, but at this point they still had the place in Chinatown and they had a new place in Alston, which they called Sunshine Restorations. Like, that was the front business that was supposed to be, I don't know if they ever specified what they were restoring, but Sunshine was Tor's nickname, I guess, when late high school. He had his hair like manic panicked, like highlighter yellow, and the cops called him Sunshine. Okay. So just, like, I knew about Sunshine Restoration long before I heard the story about Sunshine being one of Tor's nicknames. But that place was like in the press kits and stuff where it says started in a leaky warehouse in the 90s. That's literally the warehouse on Rug Road in Alston. Okay. And it's still there. At least the last time I was over there, it hasn't been torn down.
Does it have a Sunshine Restoration?
That sign's long gone. It was I know Tor was telling me many years after the fact that it was like a redemption center. Okay. And he, of course, went over there. Tor was like the master of and lover of just like the random drop in before, and then hang out and, suck your life for 4 hours talking about, So he's doing this with like a total stranger, the kid that is running the redemption center. And it was like, hey, is there still a urinal in that bathroom over there? Yeah, I installed that urinal, which he was so proud of. And you couldn't buy urinal cakes without like a dealer account for, janitorial warehouse service. So he was like, I got to be like the people with their dogs, and he does the motion like he's putting his hand inside of a doggy doo-doo bag. He's like, going to bars and go in and get the urinal cakes. And that's like such a typical like old squatter, hanging out with the bums, like Tor, like he really was like that. A lot of the time, not all the time. I mean, he was also, Angela was worried about me. Like, if you don't know him coming off like too much of an asshole in stories because you don't know him. Part of that is, Tor, I think, was legitimately a genius, like had the IQ level but just chose the life he did and then had the mental problems that ultimately, led to his younger demise. But so like, you cross words with him, like insult battle or practical joke or anything, like you never won. Like he always got the last word. Like you could never, and maybe the 1 or 2 times in my life where I got the last word with something with Tor, it sounds like I hate him, but it's like a treasured memory because it's like the one time I actually won. But, it's like beating a guy twice your size in a boxing match because not only was he smarter, but he loved that shit. He loved to talk shit and like the stuff you talk about, like the East Coast, like, if we're not busting your balls, we don't like you. There was a conversation I walked in on in his garage, him and Mad Dog, where like if you didn't know them, you would think they were like guns were going to be drawn. Like they were just so brutal to each other. This is one of those, like I cannot even repeat most of it on here. Other than, it was about Tor's girlfriend at the time. And actually, Mad Dog's ender is repeatable, but just what led up there, you just leave it to your imagination. But his ender was like, oh, well, I mean, if she's into you, she's probably got it in for every piss bum in Boston.
Yeah.
She's probably off somewhere with Mr. Butch right now.
Mr. Butch. If you don't, that's inside Boston joke right there, Mr. Butch.
Butch was a homeless guy that was at the Rat a lot.
Yeah.
And I guess, I wouldn't know being a straight edge kid, but I guess he was very reliable to go get everyone booze. Like if you just gave him a bunch of money.
Yeah.
And there was someone made a documentary that's probably out there floating around about Butch.
Oh, really? Yeah.
On YouTube.
Actually, you know what? Yeah.
Because he was that wave where like everybody was buying scooters all of a sudden. He crashed on one and died during that whole era when scooters got popular and the cops weren't making you put license plates on them or anything.
Yeah.
And like a lot of homeless people like him were riding him around. So yeah, I know there's a documentary out there on him if you're interested in who Butch was, but he was just like Tor had one of his suitcases in our practice space. He was like, once the Kings of Nuthin actually started, Butch used to do like, he was in Berkeley at some point before he was homeless, I guess.
Yeah.
And he played music on the street and he had a suitcase that he had painted up to say the Mr. Butch Show. And Tor's garage was in Alston. I forget the name of the street, but right next to a thrift store. So he was in that thrift store constantly buying, like, he found Butch's suitcase. He found tapes from like all the kids in all those Alston apartments. Like he was so happy one day he came to practice. He'd bought some hardcore kids tapes and it was like, he was so excited to get Vegan Reich.
Yeah.
Just because of the ridiculousness. And he was like, kept yelling at all of us, "You've gone soft." Dude, we're trying to practice here. Like we got a show, like, "You've gone soft." So there was another one that just, I mean, it tickled all of our, like, it was Madball on one side of the tape and Rush on the other.
So weird. Probably the only tape in existence that has those two.
No, I think there's, diehards like us. And then there are people that like hardcore and punk and also normal music.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the people that actually make up the audience for like bands that you and I have been in, but we don't, or at least I can say, I don't understand how that works other than I just have to accept, like, you know what, for them, it wasn't like so much of a, like, well, I mean, this is like real music. This is, intense.
Yeah.
Versus like mainstream music is a lot more tame and easy to but hey, it makes them happy to listen to it. But it was a funny juxtaposition. So where were we at with bands? Boston, my two shows were the Blackouts, and then they got another singer involved who wanted to play guitar while he sang. So that was kind of like made me unnecessary. Oh, and Mr. Green had left and they brought in this new guy, Justin, soon to be known as Justice. So, which Tor big on the nicknames, loved nicknames. Nicknames are pretty big in Boston.
Yeah.
As well, but Tor I love nicknames. Like never called me Matt.
Yeah.
From the second I met him, called me Slick.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a compliment. I didn't figure it out until probably knowing him for maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
And I actually put him on the spot about it once without realizing it. Like I just at practice, like, why did you start? He was just like, I don't know. You looked like we called you in a. It was kind of panicky, and it was like maybe 5 years after that, I was like, oh, wait a minute. He meant Slick like in air quotes.
Yeah.
Like he thought I was this fucking nerdy Rod Flanders kid, and it would be funny to call me Slick, and kept doing it to the point where by the time I met Ray, and we were talking, like I met Ray, we were talking about bikes, and then they played another show, and they were like, hey, have you met our friend Slick? He's got a BSA. And brought Ray over, was like, I already met this dude. Like, I would say that was the moment where I gave up on trying to introduce myself to anyone as,
anything other than
I'm Slick. Yeah. So, and that didn't last too long. That unfortunately fortunately, I don't know.
It was still under Boston Blackouts?
Yeah, they did a few shows with that dude singing, and I don't know. I remember Zach telling a story about playing at the place that used to be the Causeway. It wasn't the Causeway at that point, but they got some shows there. And I don't know if it was with that singer or if it was early on with Tor singing, but Danny was probably underage at the time. He was so drunk. He was trying to put his sax on and he was trying to clip it or tie it to his necktie. And Zach was like, dude, what? Like, I don't want my sax. I can't get it. I can't get it on. And he's like, that's your tie. Just remember Zach saying like, all right, this is going to be a good show. Like, it just reminded me of like, Danzig's stories about getting frustrated with the Misfits because they would be too drunk to play the songs right. And he like, I mean, they were badass songs, right? Like, similar thing. Like Zach was just being like, man, like, why am I in this band? Because Zach was another one. He came in with the Boston Blackouts. That was when Zach appeared on piano from Pressure Cooker. So when the band, and it might have been, it seems like it was a year. Like I ran into them a couple times. Oh, and so they were still practicing over in that warehouse before they got kicked out. And I think Pissy called me or something. I don't know. Anyway, someone called me up at our place on Tremont Street to let me know that they were practicing without me. Yeah. They had basically kicked me out of the band without telling me. So, which I wasn't psyched about. Like it wasn't a big deal because my little rinky dink band seemed really professional by comparison. Okay. I liked some of the stuff they had come up with musically, and I got along with them. I mean, they're assholes, but in a way that I liked. They were my friends. But it's really funny with how, really circling the drain, like the bottom of the band's actually gigging in any way. I mean, that's where I was with my surf band. And that seemed like the real band. And the Boston Blackouts was like a side project of that little rinky dink. Yeah. Like that's how,
That's how it wasn't set in your
head. That was kind of the secret of their success. That was how we got the show with the Racketeers, because those guys were such characters. They would go out to the shows and like guys like Dana and Spike in the Racketeers were just like, oh, these guys have a band? Like, all right, you're playing with us. We don't even need to hear you, Yeah. And so they got their foot in the door. So I can remember running into Zach at Little Stevie's talking about like what happened. Cause obviously I wasn't like, I don't know if they must've played shows with that dude, but I didn't see them play. I wasn't following them around. I mean,
shout out to Little Stevie's too, especially back then. Best slice in Boston.
Well, and that was Danny's hangout. I think even before he was going to Berkeley, but sure, once he was at Berkeley, I mean, Danny made sure when the Kings of Nuthin were just barely existed, he got them to hang the photo.
I remember the photo hanging up in Little Stevie's.
That was all Danny Edge, rest in peace. And we haven't even gotten to him yet, because that was, I think Tor got him involved when he reformed the band, and because he couldn't find a good enough singer, he decided to, plus he had met Spike. So it was like the deal going back to my high school band with my friend Andy. He was a freshman and I was a senior. I played bass. He happened to live walking distance from my house. I don't even think he knew what punk was, but he was like interested and wanted to do it. Yeah. And so I switched, and he was way better than me, even though he was a freshman and I was a senior. So that's why I switched to guitar, So Tor convinced Spike to play with them as like a side project. And so there was no point in having someone besides Spike Katz on bass if you could get Spike to do it. Like he's crazy now, he's 10 years older than I am, and he's still like, so Spike, I heard a story way back, I guess when he was like a preteen, 12, 13, 14 or something up in Canada, he got accepted to Juilliard. So he's like a child prodigy type level musician. Didn't want to go, ran away from home and like lived in a punk house in Toronto. That's as much of the story as I heard. And I've never like sat him down and grilled him on, but he's like a crazy musician. Like when the band I was in with him most recently, he had never learned how to play guitar. So he taught himself how to play guitar so that he could teach his daughter. And then he wrote some stuff for us to do in the band, and I couldn't play it. And I've been playing for, I don't know, 25 years or whatever. So they got him. They had Justin, who was another Berkeley kid. Danny, despite being like, a quote unquote hardcore kid, young member of FSU at that point. He was also a sax player who went to Berkeley. And I I don't know exactly how Tor met him. I know I met Danny because one of his friends from high school worked with me at one of the messenger shops. I were like, his buddy from high school worked with me, and I know I met Danny in PO Square at one point. And so they got him playing sax. And so Tor had this lineup because at this point, you know, he was looking to do something that wasn't rockabilly.
Yeah.
And I know at one point, might have been when we were doing the Blackouts, I remember Tor saying to me and Liam, like, yeah, I'm not as into that gay rockabilly stuff as you guys. Like, I just want to do straight up rock and roll, you know?
Yeah.
Which will qualify that with, you know, I can think of another time where I was skipping class, riding my skateboard through Copley Square, and Tor drove by in his van, because at this point he had gone to, it was like the tail end of his career as a messenger before he became a mechanic. And so he was just doing runs in his van. And I just hear someone yell, slick, like hop in the van. I mean, he had like a Stray Cats cassette that never left the tape deck of the van.
Yeah.
And he was like, you know, just all about the Stray Cats for a while, you know, and I went through similar phases. Like for me, there was definitely a year of like the Cramps.
Yeah.
Just definitely drove with my roommates up on Mission Hill nuts with like Link Ray for a while. Like, but I know at a point Tor definitely liked rockabilly.
Yeah.
But I'll give him credit. You know, he was maybe the first person I ever met that was like pushing stuff like doo-wop that we'd never considered. Like, yeah, maybe some of that shit is cool. I mean, not all rockabilly from the 50s is cool. Some of it sucks, but some of it is like, it's like punk.
Yeah.
It's like just from a different era. So there's definitely, you know, there's R&B that's like that, and there's doo-wop that's like that, and they were some of the first ones to try to be like, all right, because in Boston the rockabilly scene was all old punks of some kind, and I think they wanted it to be like just almost like another genre of punk, like hardcore, but like not his. And I know in other places people are big into the vintage stuff and period, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just not what we were into for sure.
Sure.
So yeah. Credit where credit's due. Those guys, you know, especially Tor and Liam, and then Spike too, huge doo-wop record collector. You know, they were some of the first people to bring that in, and that was like the roots. You know, so that first EP, you know, it's maybe half of them are.
So when did it go from Boston Blackout to Kings of Nuthin? What year was that? That this is what you're talking about?
Yeah, at this point we're in '99.
Okay.
And you know they did a few shows under different names too before they picked up the Kings of Nuthin name, which comes from, you know, there was a crew in the rockabilly scene, none of whom I had met at that point, called the Kings of Nuthin that had started down in Florida. And Spike knew them from touring with the Racketeers, and like, I guess hit him up like, you know, if you knew this group of dudes in Boston, like the name you guys are using for your club, it like fits this band just as well, but kind of in a different way. So, you know, can we use it? And you know, there's two sides to this story, none of which I was present for. Like, I remember a show that they played where a bunch of the guys came down from Montreal, the guys from the club. And, you know, at the point I didn't know there was a club. And I was like, who are the dudes that already have that? Like, they're already like got your name, you know, they're not even from Boston. Like, who were they? And Liam's like, oh yeah, that's the Kings of Nuthin gang from Canada. Like, what? What? How is that? You know, wasn't probably until a year or two later, like that. Well, I even understood
is the versus of.
Well, right. So Spike got in touch with someone in Florida where the crew started, and I'm not sure they actually gave permission necessarily, because so it started in Florida, and one of the guys involved in starting it in Florida was from Montreal. He was down there going to MMI, and at this point he had moved back to Montreal, and you know, the club kind of blew up really quick too, just like the band. So it went from just a handful of guys in Florida to like, you know, a couple handfuls of guys in Florida, and then he moves back to Montreal, and all of a sudden there's a couple handfuls of guys up in Montreal, and they were talking. I think my take on it was they were talking back and forth about doing it, but the guys in the band, like I guess Spike was the one talking to him. You know, this is me speculating at this point.
Yeah.
I think they thought it was cool, but maybe not everyone had weighed in from both Montreal and Florida.
Yeah, I get you, yeah.
And I think that's why those dudes showed up at one of the shows before I ever knew who they were. Because I mean, we talked about this later on, like, and they were just like, yeah, we saw the band, and we were like, we weren't super cool with someone taking our name, but they were like an awesome rock and roll band. So, and I think at that point it already kind of happened.
Yeah.
And that was the way they thought they'd try to differentiate. Like the club is Kings A Nuthin.
Yeah.
Kind of like phonetic spelling, kind of like you would see on like World War II nose art.
Yeah.
Like that. And so they changed it to OF of for the band, thinking that would differentiate. But it's kind of weird how it worked out, because at the height of that club's popularity, like the big chapters were in other places. You know, there was only a handful of us in Boston, like never more than 4 or 5, you know, and I think people thought we were just like super fans of the band or something.
Yeah.
Like they didn't realize there was a difference. And then, like up in Montreal, a lot of the locals in the scene up there didn't know there was a band called the Kings of Nuthin.
Yeah.
They just, because there was like a big crew of guys up there that was the Kings of Nuthin they knew. And there was a weird, like, the border is weird with the US and Canada, because sometimes with like music and stuff, sometimes it's like it doesn't exist, and then other times it's like it really does exist.
It's like an iron curtain, yeah.
Yeah, because we never had good luck as a band, like touring, you know, as far as getting hassled by the cops, vehicles breaking down, all that stuff. So we definitely didn't try to bullshit our way across the border.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of bands did, and most of them got caught, because this was right when everyone started putting up websites for their bands. So they go to the border and be like, oh yeah, we're going to record in a studio in Montreal, and what's your band called? The border agent just goes online and looks at the band's website, and it says they're playing in Montreal, and all right, go back home. You don't have working papers, you know?
Yeah,
so we never played up there. So it was like a weird dynamic, but one of the guys from the club I met, you know, before I was in the band, right when they were putting this lineup together and, you know, writing the songs that would become that first EP, Alex from Florida came up intending to, I think, move to Boston, but, you know, and it didn't work out. He ended up moving back, but, you know, me and him hit it off. I had sort of failed, sort of dropped out of mass art at this point, had to move back into my parents' house in New Hampshire because I was broke. Didn't have anyone that I was friends with from high school didn't live there anymore. So I was in kind of like a weird place. There wasn't a whole lot of prospects for work. You know, the only thing that was good about being back up there was the roads. And I did still have my bike on the road. But when I would come down, I went to like all the Kings of Nuthin shows, because when I heard their first demo, like Zach told me at that time at Little Stevie's that they might put the band back together. And then I heard they did. And then we were at the Road Agents car show, one of the early ones, which was kind of a big deal for us out here. It's like one of the first car shows for like greasers. You know,
it was big.
Yeah. Well, and it made all the national magazines just by, we're not going to have high-tech cars. We're just going to be like our type of cars.
Yeah.
And that was enough to get them into all these, you know, that was offensive enough to like get them in the magazines. But yeah, they had put together a demo with Tor singing, and I was blown away. Like I said, I wasn't psyched on them, like kicking me out of the band and not even telling me.
Yeah.
So I had a reason to be kind of bitter against them as a band. Like it didn't stop. The times that I hung out with Tor, like it didn't matter. But, and I was so blown away by what they had done musically. And some of it was the same songs, you know?
Yeah.
But
just restructured a little.
Yeah, different lyrics.
Just things added.
But I mean, having Spike on bass, the way Tor did the vocals, he was just like, well, I can't sing like a real singer, so I'm just going to scream like punk rock, you know? But it actually came out more like, you know, if you listen to old R&B, they call those singers shouters. Yeah. So, I mean, that's going to be one of your parallels between 50s R&B and like any type of punk from the 70s onward, is like those dudes just shouted. They weren't good singers. They were good shouters, you know? But it was like a lot of people didn't get it, you know. We're thinking, yeah, he's like Wynonie Harris, you know. Or Tommy mentioned once, another Berkeley kid in the band, like, yeah, he's like the White Howlin' Wolf. It's like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Except like a lot of the people who are spending their money to come out and see us play, they don't know who Howlin' Wolf is.
Yeah,
So if they want to say he's like snotty punk rock or he sounds like Dickie or like, that's cool. That's fine. Yeah. But it is one of those things like we were talking about, I don't know if I don't know who the fan base is of this day, or if they know that the band like really came out of the rockabilly scene, which was, kind of like a lot of, it was like almost for a certain group of people, it was like more punk than punk.
Yeah.
Like more underground, more obscure. Like you actually started having to dig records a little bit more. Although they're obviously, you were just talking about it with Ray, they're crate diggers for punk and hardcore and stuff too. But, so yeah, they blew me away with that demo. And from that point on, I was at a ton of their shows for whatever reason, punk rock white kid from New Hampshire and Alex he was originally from LA before he moved to Florida. So, like Pachuco type dude, like for whatever reason, him and I had just hit it off. Like we'd known each other for years and years. So, and he's the guy that wrote, there's like an interlude in the song King of Nuthin that is Alex's lyrics, and he did the artwork on that first album. And then the other thing he did, because I think I alluded to it earlier, like no one in the band had a car. So just for them to play a local show. I mean, when we played the show in Providence with the Racketeers, we had to rent a U-Haul truck.
Yeah.
Like, because nobody had any way to, and actually you
had to bring an upright bass and a piano. Yeah.
Right. Zach, the second show I played with the Blackouts was I remember it was in Worcester. Zach couldn't do it, so we didn't have the piano. So I borrowed I'm the oldest of 7 kids, so my family had a huge van. So I went up to my parents' house and grabbed that and borrowed it to drive us from Boston to Worcester, back to Boston, and then I went back to New Hampshire to return the van to my parents.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to remember the timeline on this. Tor figured out he could get one of those old bread delivery trucks, like a big panel truck. They had one of those, and I forget the exact, there were problems with it, and Tor was trying to fix everything. Easier said than done. Plus, our attitude back then, like, all right, it runs. All right, let's hop in it and go to Philly.
Yeah.
Like it barely, but at some point I think they literally stole another bread truck and switched the VIN tags out of it. Something that had been abandoned on the street in Alston in their neighborhood. Even though I think at this point they were no longer living in that leaky warehouse. They literally stole it and switched the VIN tags, and I don't know what they did with like
the old one. Yeah.
And so, once again, I think my little surf band did a couple shows with them, like before they broke in, even with, some of the other rockabilly bands in Boston started to get opening and then headlining spots. We did a few shows, and we drove down to New York City to play with them. And they didn't have any doors for the back of their truck. So it's like a box van, driver up front with that sliding door open and like no doors in the back. And, they had so many instruments and everything as far as road cases, it was all suitcases Tor bought at that thrift store. So and shelves, homemade shelves in the back there. So I know one of the shows, I don't know if it was literally the one we followed them down to, or if it was another show, but from that era of the Kings of Nuthin with what did Tor call it? Like the Mad Max guerrilla warfare truck or something that preceded the Schlitz truck. But they're in the back of this thing. Tor had put together like a frame out of angle iron and stuff to put a door. But the doors that came with the truck had fallen off or something that were all rotted. And so he hadn't finished the door yet. So they're all in the back, coming back from the rodeo bar. And instruments and stuff keep falling off the shelves and hitting them in the head. So they had other gear in milk crates. So a couple of the dudes picked the milk crates up off the floor and were riding in the back with the milk crates on their head. But because there was never a stop to drinking in this band, they had 40s with straws. They stopped to get straws so they could drink their 40s out of a straw through their milk crate. And there's no doors. So anyone who pulls up behind them on 95 is watching this happen.
Yeah.
Because
it's amazing nothing fell out of the truck.
Yes. Tor was so worried about breaking down out by Worcester or something. on like 84 in the middle of nowhere that they would take 95 the whole way. And this is just something New England people would appreciate. Like they went from Boston South through Providence and then followed all like through New London and all those cities.
Yeah, instead of doing the 84, 91.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because he was like, well, if we break down, we'll be able to walk to a parts store.
Yeah.
Which was known to happen with that truck. So they upgraded from that the summer Alex was up. And he painted, and people probably still have pictures. I may even still have pictures of that truck. He painted a giant like pinup girl and the Schlitz globe and wings and stuff on the side of the truck that was so convincing that we were still driving it when I joined the band, and they were asking us for beers at the toll booths and stuff because they thought it was a real Schlitz delivery truck. Fucking Alex did that, it like blew me away as someone who went to art school. Like Alex was totally a self-trained artist. He did that holding a can of beer in his hand. Like that was his model. And he, like a real striper or something, although he wasn't a pinstriper, like did a 6 foot tall pinup girl and all that on the side of the truck.
Yeah.
Like, so, and then, like I said, Alex was one of the founding members of the club. So,
Yeah.
For whatever that's worth, that's where the name came from. And there's the slight difference and, whatever. But those guys down in Florida, those were the first Kings of Nuthin.
Yeah.
For whatever that's worth, right?
Sure.
So.
And then when did you get back? When did you come back in the band? Oh.
Okay. So, yeah, you know what? That's a good transition to the next, like, major thing. So I know, N99... I ended up roadieing for them again. They played this psychobilly weekender thing in New Jersey. And they needed a vehicle, and we borrowed my Flanders van again.
Yeah.
And that was definitely like, it was a crazy weekend. I didn't get much sleep. I know that they actually put us in a hotel. Demented Argo was headlining. The singer, who was notoriously actually nuts, got put in jail. It was like their first time ever playing in the United States or something crazy like that. And he got put in jail, and the headliner didn't play at this weekender. And that was one of the first times I met. That's the first time I met Vadim, was on that weekender. Like had moved to Boston. My old roommate, one of my best friends, another guy from the Kings of Nuthin club who had moved to Boston. He was just hanging out at their practice space when I showed up, and I think he hopped in the van and came with us.
Okay.
I barely knew him at that point, but pretty sure he was involved in that. And I can remember being in the hotel room. Danny was watching, what's that movie? One Crazy Summer or something? The one that's like set on the vineyard.
Yeah.
Like that came on TV, and he was just like, all right, everyone shut up. Like took over. And so he's sitting in the bed. And this was also the trip where like girlfriends were no longer allowed after this trip. Necro's girlfriend was there with him. And she was sitting on the bed with Danny. And Necro came back, and he was really drunk. And he got like super pissed for Danny sitting next to his girlfriend.
Yeah.
Ran off of Liam, was telling stories the next day how he body slammed a tree. Necro was such a funny dude. Sounds like Boomhauer on King of the Hill, because he's from Houston. Cajun accent, like, so he's like some crazy squatter punk greaser who sounds like Boomhauer.
Yeah.
And one of the Tor and Liam, that squatter group. So that happens. Danny's watching the movie. Some friend of ours that we knew from the scene, who I would say was into stimulants, just showed up. It was getting really late at this point, and I had driven, and I was like ready to go to sleep, but there's like 10 people in this room. So you can only expect so much. But this dude starts just talking a mile a minute, like comes in the door. So I just walked over and got in the closet and closed the door behind me until we left, tried to fall asleep. And it's one of those lines I'll never forget, because dude left and Spike opened the door. He's like, "Hey, Slick, come out of the closet and get in bed with Danny."
Yeah.
So, that's a line I remember. Like I said, a lot of these stories, we're going to have to trigger something for me to remember, just like the nonstop. I mean, a lot of it was like the nonstop drinking. It's like, why did it take us 8 to 10 hours to get to New York? It wasn't just that the bus only went 50 miles an hour. It's because dudes are drinking like nonstop. So we're stopping to let people pee like every 45 minutes.
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
every stop, every, those truck stops in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Like once we were brave
every
enough
30
to
miles,
go. Yeah. At one point it got so bad, Tor decided he got a big, like a funnel, like you'd use for oil changes, like a big one that was a couple feet long. And once we had upgraded to the short bus, which followed the Schlitz truck in the lineage, he would keep that up front, and you would have to go into the door well, jam the funnel through the rubber of the school bus door and piss out the funnel and then spray it with brake cleaner so you didn't have to stop. And it's just like, if I talk about like being stressed out, being the responsible dude in all this, it's because it wasn't just long trips. Like we're driving from our practice space in Charlestown to like TT's, and everyone is like open containers. Like, we got pulled over regularly. Like, we never got busted for that, but like we got pulled over on Storrow Drive and busted for being over height when we weren't actually, like, stuff like that happened all the time. But there was like never for a second a thought of like, maybe we should stop drinking.
No, yeah.
We can drink at the show, right? It's in a bar, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that was like Tor and them's, and that actually was probably more like there was a different vibe between the guys in the club and the band.
Yeah.
Even though it was a similar name. And, Tor and his buddies, they had kind of like a little crew when they were squatting that they called Cocked. And I think the theme of that was sort of like, these were dudes that would party with you, harder than you've ever partied, and would like, bang your girlfriend and be 100 miles away out of time by the time you recovered from your hangover, and I think that was really kind of like Tor's idea for the band was kind of an extension of like the shenanigans that he did when he was squatting.
Yeah.
Like we can do this with a band. And then, I think I would have never thought this when they were doing the band, but I think the Bosstones were a big influence because Tor loved to like roll into places like the Wu-Tang Clan, like a million dudes. Like I remember, pre-band, like doing things with him. Like we definitely went to a couple parties. I don't know how we even knew they existed. Like parties in lofts in Chinatown and stuff.
Yeah,
Record label party, not Warner Brothers, but the hip indie rock type crap that was popular. Like somehow we found out about it, roll up with like 8 or 10 dudes and, all of them fucking weirdos, like in different ways.
Yeah.
Whether they were like honorary, like Mad Dog, or like, fucking Rod Flanders, like me.
Yeah.
Tor loved to just roll up with just like one character after another. And that was really, when we were down in Florida on the road, I can remember Alex saying to me, like, that was the strong point of the band, was like every single one of us was a character, like in a different kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I know Tor definitely listens to the Bosstones because he left me a message on my machine once where it was just, "Where did you go?" And then he like paused to the horn line to that song, and then "Where did you go?" He just did it like 6 times and then hung up.
Yeah.
Back when we had answering machines.
Yeah.
So yeah, they put that out. They recorded the EP, which was a couple more songs, and that would have been, when Zach started writing songs, which, Zach wrote most of the songs, and Zach was like the secret weapon. And, I think he's the type of dude who would never go somewhere. Yeah, I wrote,
Yeah.
He'd deliberately not say it, but I'm to this day blown away by his songs. And like, I wrote songs for my band before, and I contributed minimally to stuff that we did with this band, but I'm still like blown away by some of his lyrics. So
he wrote the lyrics too.
Yeah. The lyrics and he gave a lot of credit to Tor as like an editor. So a lot of the songs that to me, like, cause I can read through the lyrics and without having been there, I know which songs on Get Basically Living or Get Basically Died. And like, that's a Tor song. That's a Zach song,
Yeah.
To me, it's night and day, but it wasn't when I was still just going to see them play shows. It was only after like being at practice with them for a couple of years and stuff. And then knowing them since, the years after and all that. But yeah, for any fans that are out there who thought just Tor wrote everything, no, some credit to Zach, aka the Professor. He crazy lyric. I mean, Of course, I'm drawing a blank on some of his best lines, but
Sure, yeah.
usually they just pop right out. I can remember when we were recording fight songs, you know, the Jim at the outpost, just like hearing Tor sing the line. He's like, what the fuck? Like, how can you write tests of adolescence under flickering fluorescence?
Yeah.
It's like, that's fucking Zach, dude. Like he similar to like a really scary, good rapper or something that can just put out. I mean, that's something that always, I don't remember, was it before we started recording or not, where I was talking about like, I didn't even know there was good hip hop until the early 2000s when I was in my night shift security guard job.
Oh yeah.
You know, but yeah, you know, I've always struggled with lyrics, and, you know, hearing these dudes that you can just come up with, you know, an album that's nothing but lyrics.
Yeah.
Or if it was a punk song, it would have 12 verses. We're like, holy fuck, I'm struggling to do 3.
Yeah.
You know, and then dudes that can freestyle on, like, I'm such a tourist in that music scene. Like, I love it, but I know so little about it. But that always really impressed me. And Zach brought that. And I guess a lot of times Tor would come in and be like, yeah, let's cut half this out, you know?
Yeah.
But there were still a lot of songs that Tor wrote all the words to.
Sure.
You know?
It's like anything. A good band is like that, where it's like everyone's
well, I think that was
got their piece in it. You know?
Yeah, especially in the early days of that band, because everyone was such a fuck up. You know, you had like Spike was like a veteran, having done the Racketeers and other bands before that. It was like very much a group effort, and I think it was less of a group effort later on when we were trying to, you know, quote unquote, make it. It was more just like, all right, Zach and Tor are going to write the songs and we just need to learn them. And, you know, we got to try to do this. We got to try to tour this much. Blah, you know, we got to try to schmooze with these people, which we were terrible at, you know, like the last people to try to go to any industry function or fucking. But there's more stories about that later. Let's get, I mean, so what was crazy with that, they put out the album in like, I want to say in November, that EP. And I don't know, within less than a month, let's say for sure, you know, Danny's dead, which is, you know, and he was 21, you know, and like, I didn't know him super well. But like never heard of him being into any type of drug you could OD on, you know?
Yeah.
He was just like, you know, young buck from the FSU crew, brawler, you know, smart ass. One of the funniest things I ever saw at a rockabilly show, I think it was a weekend I crashed at Tor's apartment in Dorchester when I was living back in New Hampshire for that year after I dropped out. And they were doing like a jam session on the corner at the Middle East. And it was the first time Wildfire Willie came from Sweden, which was like a big deal because they were really, really good musicians. They wrote really authentic sounding songs. So they're doing a jam, and Danny was like not into rockabilly. Made fun of it a lot. You know, he had a hardcore band he sang in. So, and he was working, and I'm pretty sure he was underage, and I was buying him drinks for him to like drink as he's supposed to be on the clock. But yeah, he just insisted that he was going to go up and sing. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure it was Mike and Chris from the Speed Devils were like, at that point, the backing band up there. But yeah, he gets up there and they're like, what song you want to do? We're like, oh, I'm just going to do my song, man. And they're just like, what the fuck? All right. Just playing like a blues and E kind of thing. And Danny just starts like singing like a rockabilly, like with the most ridiculous over the top. Like, I can't do it. You know?
Yeah.
But he had like an amazing, so he's trying to make fun of it, but his singing voice was so good that like I'm sitting there in a booth and all the guys from Sweden, like the actual musicians in the room, all fucking stood up, turned around, like, who is that? Up on stage, there's Danny Edge, you know, baggy, like Blood for Blood t-shirt, like, you know, baggies like Dickie jeans or whatever. He's got his mag light that he's supposed to be carrying for work, stuff through his belt, hanging down between his legs that he's like stroking.
Yeah.
As he's singing this stuff. And these dudes are just like, what the fuck is going on in Boston? Like, but that was the beauty of like the dudes from the, you know, because it was like fucking some squatter punks, this fucking hardcore kid, ska kid, like making this crazy racket. You know, Spike said one time, like an excellent mix of musicians and non-musicians. You know? So, cause like half the band literally was Berkeley kids. And then, you know, there was like self-taught dudes like me, you know? Yeah. Did you want to pause again?
No.
All right. I thought you were ready again. So,
no. Yeah.
So yeah, the whole deal with Danny dying, obviously, you know, not to gloss over the personal aspect of it, but they had just gotten those shows with the Bosstones for the hometown throwdown that I think we talked about on Mike earlier. That was like their big break above just like opening for the Raging Teens or something at TC's. So they had multiple nights there. Zach being, you know, the quote unquote ska kid, like he got some other horn players to fill in, and they had this one dude, I think his name was John Natchez, but they had a dude playing baritone sax. So for a couple shows, they either had just baritone or they might have had baritone and tenor. And unbeknownst to me at the time, like that was the horn section for most of these R&B records that we love from the 50s. Like they weren't like a full-on big band with like brass section, woodwind section. They weren't even as big as like a Motown band. A lot of those the R&B stuff was either just tenor or like tenor Barry.
Yeah.
So that's what put it in their heads that they wanted a Barry player. And then, you know, maybe a month later, Pitsy Pete hit me up. He had a job for me in Boston, and I could crash in like a spare room in his apartment. And the job was that overnight security guard job in Charlestown where they practiced. And Tor and Spike approached me at some point. It was mostly Tor's idea. He's like, yeah, explained the whole thing. Wanted a Barry player. Like no one plays it. I mean, even today, like nobody plays horns anymore.
Yeah.
You know, everyone plays guitar, including me. So Tor was like, yeah, you know, so you got this job here. You just sit in this booth all night and do nothing, which is like,
it's true. But
it's true. But also I think the secret of my success over there was I actually did the job so that I didn't get caught like asleep when the building fire alarm was going off. Or like not being there when the fire alarm was going off, which happened to some other people that did the job because it was so boring. Like you could do that stuff and you might get away with it for even a month, but eventually you get caught. So he's like, yeah, well, we want you to, you know, I was probably, other than Tor, I was probably best. I knew Spike the best out of the guys in the band at that point. So those were the two guys that like came to me.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, you can teach yourself sax. And I was like, I don't know if I can teach myself sax.
Yeah.
I try, you know, being a music nerd and being into like stuff like blues, you know, I did try to learn harmonica at one point in addition to guitar. And I absolutely failed. Like couldn't note one, like couldn't pull it off.
Seems a little more intricate too, right? Like
sax is not. So I'm like, you know, how much are horns? Like, I don't even have enough, you know, I played cheap ass, like $200 guitars back then. And I beat the shit out of them. I'm an absolute caveman guitar player. Not so much anymore, but back then for sure. So like, how much is a sax? Like, no idea. All right. Well, next day I'm calling like one of the only sax shops in Boston. Like, how much is it to rent a sax? Like, well, you can get a tenor for $25 a month. Like, oh, okay. Cool. How much is a baritone? It was like $250 or something for a baritone. It's like, all right, I'll get the tenor, you know? So I drove down there. I think Vadim drove me in his 57 Chevy. Maybe he might, I don't know. That might've been a couple months later when I rented the Barry, but I started with that tenor and you know, it was like a 10-hour shift and a lot of it was quiet time. So I just sat there, learned to play like a couple riffs. And then I had those 8 songs on the EP, like learned to play all of those. And then like had to switch to baritone, spent a couple months, you know, and I was like broke, like no money in the bank, working as many hours as I could. They were only paying, I mean, the pay was like nothing. It might've been $8 an hour. Which and this would have been 2000, right? End of 2000 into 2001. So, they had a break in their shows in like March. And that was when I started practicing with them, barely hacking my way through it, like trying to learn the songs they hadn't recorded. And then, you know, they had also, out of the guys that had filled in, the Barry player, not interested. They had this really young dude, Tom, another Berkeley kid who was, well, cause Tor was like, you know, a lot of these dudes, like they don't fit in with us at all. They're not like thugs like us, you know, so you'll fit in, which was like, it's kind of funny, like, you know, cause like I said, Tor and me would have been like in Fight Club, like he was Tyler Durden and I was the fucking tightly wound office guy. There's definitely a lot of moments like that. which I learned to appreciate.
Sure.
You know, over the years, you know, even before the days of the band. So yeah, probably played my first shows in April. Ended up buying like I couldn't find a good, I mean, I barely knew what to look for, but I couldn't find a good used Barry, and that the price goes way, way up when you jump from tenor to, I mean, alto, because that's what every kid starts with if they're going to play in their $50, $100, cheap alto.
Yeah, yeah.
Tenor, you know, you could get one for $300 or $400 up to, you know, for Berkeley kids like Tommy or Hayden, or, you know, they'll spend $5,000 on a really nice one that they'll play for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Baritones were, you know, used like $2,000 minimum,
Wow, yeah.
you know? So I found this shop.
Is it just because there's not as many made, or supply and demand?
Exactly. Exactly. So I found a shop that was doing like their own shop brand. So it was brand new. So it was easy for me to play, but it was a cheap piece of shit. And it cost me $2,200, all of which went on a credit card.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I played like a couple local shows, you know, and this is like the same thing. Like I'm hoping I don't forget the songs.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
not only do I barely know the songs, I barely know the instrument.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I found this
And
out.
then by then the band's a little more established.
The band is very established.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
we're,
so
we're headlining in Boston,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
to pretty decent sized rooms.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I didn't really understand how lucky I was until the band I was in 4 or 5 years ago, where we were doing, it was kind of like the Kings of Nuthin, like that type of R&B, but way less punk. And I was playing guitar. Like I thought this was going to be the band where I was going to be, because I knew Tom was involved, and he was like, no, my friend Luke is going to play Barry. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like not only do you have one horn player, you actually have two. You know?
Yeah.
So Luke shows up, and without really I mean, he didn't go to Berkeley, but he makes a living playing music, and he prides himself on being able to like hang with Berkeley kids with skill level, and he does. But he'd like never heard any of the songs before. So Tom would be like, all right, this is the riff for the song. And then they would play it. And it went from like 0 to 100, putting that second horn in there, even though he barely knew the songs. And I was like, oh shit, that was the secret of my success. Because you add that Barry to like the sound we were going for, and you go from having a saxophone to a horn section.
Yeah.
Even if you know, it's almost like a bass and guitar type thing, with the tenor being like the guitar and the Barry player being like the bass player of the horn section.
Yeah.
You don't have to be completely spot on, but it's going to sound really, really good. So that was, I think, what got me by for at least a year, you know?
Yeah.
I can remember doing sound checks, and everyone's like just playing whatever, you know, the shit I would play if I was playing guitar at a sound check. And I literally know 12 songs on this horn.
So you're playing those songs.
Yeah. And I'm like so you know, like it's an empty room, the sound man, but like so self-conscious about, all right, I guess I'll play, you know, Get Busy Living or Get Busy Dying.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
hadn't even learned, you know, if I was going to learn something, it was going to have to be another song, another Kings of Nuthin song, another one of the ones they'd written.
Yeah. Because you weren't sitting at home playing other old R&B songs or something.
Yeah. It would have been a little bit easier maybe if I'd had time to do that. But, you know, that was my like unique path into that instrument, you know, and whatever. Obviously it worked out.
Fake it till you make it, right?
Pretty much. Yeah. And, you know, I actually felt like kind of like a faker, like being up there with especially with dudes like Spike. But, you know, he mentioned something about it like really recently, a couple years ago, you know, like as far as me trying to learn something when we were doing that other band, it's like, Spike, I'm just a regular dude. I'm not like, you know, and he's like, no, you're really good. And I never thought about it that way. I was like, oh yeah, I guess if I taught myself sax at my job, and played a show, you know, on a difficult instrument within a few months, like, I guess I do have some talent. Like maybe I could have gone to Berkeley.
Yeah.
But I never thought of it that way, because I was struggling to keep my head above water when it came to playing.
Yeah.
So that was my ticket back in, was unfortunately, you know, the death of a friend. But, you know, the upside of that was that led to the Kings of Nuthin having a horn section, not just, you know, which I think was really cool. You know, as far as music we made that I'm proud of, you know, that we were able to write parts that were way cooler because we had those two horns.
Now, how long was it before you felt comfortable on the horn?
Never.
Yeah.
No. I'm sure I did by the time So I was in the band for just about 3 years.
Yeah.
And we toured Europe in the beginning of that third year. So I was definitely comfortable by then.
Sure.
So, and then especially at the end of that tour, because, you know, that's a serious tour. Like we never had enough fan base to tour like that in the States, you know, where we're playing every single night. You know, like, so we could fast forward to our first East Coast tour, which might've been about maybe a year after I first started learning the horn. It was in the middle of the winter, drove down to Florida and back. Like a bunch of us got sick from the climate change and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That was for the Rumblers car show. They had just like started a chapter down there, and I'll have to like give a little nod to Roger, because, you know, not that no one ever helped us as a band, but we didn't have, and also I wasn't involved in the band management as much. A lot of that went through tour. But I don't remember anyone, you know, who was like, what would you call Roger? Like an established musician or something, someone who was well respected.
And just for people listening, you talk about Roger from Agnostic Front.
Yeah. Yeah. He was like a big fan. Like he came out to a lot of the shows they did in New York City at the rodeo bar. Like before I was in the band, he might've been at the one that my band played with them. And we didn't go over well with the New York rockabilly crowd.
Yeah,
I didn't want some fucked up Todd Flanders on surf guitar, but the Kings of Nuthin were totally down with that. But like, yeah, whatever. These guys are kind of pure, you know, like fuck them if they can, you know, and whatever. It was, maybe we weren't even that good, but we didn't have a lot of people like, all right, you need to talk to this person at this label. Like you want to get on this label, which we wanted, you know, we wanted to take that next step and try to, you know, make this a job. And, you know, we were never able to get someone to manage us who could have made that happen. And because it wasn't me, I don't know if it was because of our rep or, you know, in hindsight, the whole scene we were coming out of and, you know, was actually dying. Like the 90s were over. I mean, we didn't know it yet in 2001 or even in 2003, but you know, what was big and like when we were touring and stuff, it was that god awful, like early 2000s pop punk was like what everyone was trying to do. And I can just remember getting so frustrated, like, cause I think Tor was trying to come up with a way in his head that if we could play shows with bands like that, like maybe their fan base would, you know, just like thinking to myself, like, that's such a dead end. Like, dudes who like Good Charlotte are not going to like the Kings of Nuthin. Yeah. And, you know, maybe some of the dudes who were in a management position were just like, great band, but like that stuff's on the way out. Like we just know
there's nothing we can do with it.
Yeah, exactly. We can put it out, but it's not going to sell. And there's, you know, we're going to be no better off. Like maybe we wouldn't have like hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt like major label acts do when they get signed. Like if we had gotten signed to a bigger label than Disaster, but you know, it might've been the same result. We would have sold the same number of records or whatever. Like that stuff was kind of on the way out. So, and it wasn't like R&B didn't do like what ska did in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like ska was this kids, I don't think knew about ska in the 80s, you know? Yeah. Maybe some of like I was in grade school, so I'm kind of have to speculate, but I think the 90s Op Ivy, Boss Tones, like that brought it out into the public and it got really big. That didn't happen with R&B. Yeah. You know, like we thought maybe it would. I mean, look what was happening to us. Like we're going from zeros to heroes a little bit here with stuff that.
And when you say R&B, you got to differentiate between like classic R&B and contemporary.
Right. Which is, don't get me started.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like the way it was used back then, it was almost a racist term, like black people pop. You know, and it's literally the same music. It's like, really? Like you can't just call it pop? I mean, you don't see how that might be a little. Yeah.
But you know, a funny story that you might want to talk about because you brought up Roger is maybe talk about you guys trying to get, was it like, were you guys trying to get on Hellcat? Or was it?
Because it was 20 years ago. I guess Roger's not going to get in shit for this, but he was like one of the only people. So like, that's why we were playing the Rumblers show down there. And that gave us an excuse to try to string together a tour, which some shows fell through and stuff. Like I know we played in Philly on the way down, like Sunday night, right? maybe. I mean, don't quote me exactly, right?
Yeah.
It's 20 years ago. We didn't have a show until Thursday in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I think the bus broke down twice in the
On the
interim.
way. Well, it's probably good then.
And it broke down again in Atlanta. Fixed it in some dude's house. We went to the Claremont, like legendary dive bar strip club. Tor was definitely trying to emotionally scar like me and anyone else who was like, he paid for lap dances for us with like, people can look up what the Claremont was. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
It was like women off the street, like doing stripping in this place. And, it backfired. This is like one of the stories Angela wouldn't want me to tell.
Yeah.
The lap dance. So this girl used to grab her tits and like punch you in the face.
Yeah.
Like hook you. That was supposed to be my lap dance because he paid for it. It backfired on him and he got it. And he actually panicked and played dead on the floor after he got hooked. Because he didn't, she was like, "What's up, honky? Come on."
Yeah.
All right, where's honky number 2? You know, like,
Yeah.
So we fixed it again and then played the show in Atlanta and went out and did, Florida was cool. My brother Matt from the club put a show on he lived in a trailer on Daytona Beach, paid $100 a month for the trailer and his roommate paid $100. Like lived a couple blocks from this biker bar. We were just talking about it. I was down in Florida with Rick and Neil and Rick is like, "Dude, that was all like club guys." I'm like, "Really? I don't remember seeing a lot of like colors, but who knows?" I mean, we were on the road, we were drunk constantly, like, but they loved us. And this is like something I still complain about. They wanted us to come back for Biketoberfest, play every night for like $1,000 a night, which is, we're making like $250 a night on these shows on this tour. And that would be a good night.
Yeah.
We'd be happy with, so we're losing money. I mean, there's a bus.
It's like 8-9 dudes, a piano, a fucking
school bus.
Yeah.
That gets 3 miles to the gallon. That does 50 miles an hour. Like keeps braking on us. Like, and it escalates. Like the breakage keeps going.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tor especially was worried that we'd like.
At least Tor was a mechanic. You know what I mean? Guys
and he fixed the bus most of the time. I tried to help. Yeah. You know, I was somewhat of a mechanic, but nowhere close to him. You know, and you know, Tor was like not a total control freak, but I can remember going into the studio and he was all excited because of some other musician we knew of. Right? Look, we'll try to do this like Charlestown style, like not naming any names. But oh yeah, when so-and-so's in the studio, they're like dictator, man. They're like Hitler. That's what I'm going to be like in this, you know, and that could come across as like the Tor is such an asshole, but I think he thought that was like what you needed to do to make a good record. You know?
It was coming from a good place. Yeah.
So yeah. And you know, he had like the PO box for the band and he handled a lot of this stuff and, you know, he was better at it than most of us. So yeah, but he also, especially when it came to our vehicles, like he put more work into the band than anyone else. Yeah. You know, and there was stuff I got frustrated with at the time, you know, but looking back, even just 2-3 years later, once I was off the road, you know, had a little money in the bank, slept regularly, like, yeah, I was a dick. I overreacted, you know, like, so.
Hellcat Records.
Well, this was something we did when I wasn't even in the band yet. I was still learning sax. So they practiced in these buildings over in Charlestown where I worked for over 10 years as a security guard. A lot of bands practiced there a little bit later on when they expanded it. So some people may have met me working there for that 10-year period with my dog Jive, the fucking legend. So yeah, he would come and get me and he lived in our practice space in there. So, which was like totally illegal. And this was, eventually I ended up living in an illegal loft in that building too, later on, like when I met you. But, so he got this idea. They were already videotaping and put together like a press package. And like I said, we had no connections whatsoever with anyone. Like we're shooting blind, like just mail it off to, you know, Hellcat, whatever, just their address, nobody's name. Like you have no idea if anyone's ever even going to open it. Right. Sure. So Tor was really good, like because he was so smart, just like with the insult battles where you couldn't win. He had really good, like kind of like your chop ahead, like your ideas with the Born Free chopper, the helicopter.
Yeah.
I know that one didn't come to fruition, but like similar, like he came up with this thing, you know, we had someone like videotaping. Some of it was the guys in the band. Some of it was this guy, Scott, that we're friends with, who works for Ness. And he edited all this shit together. And there was a show where they were going to destroy the piano with baseball bats for the last song, which they did, which was pretty cool. And he got the idea that we were going to take the whole piano and put it in a crate and ship it off to Hellcat, because Roger had given us the dude's name, he's like, all right. And I don't remember the dude's name.
Yeah.
But like,
this is the dude to send it to.
Yeah. This is the dude who actually has to hear your, you know, and like that wasn't good enough, like just for the music. I mean, I think the music stood on its own at this point in the band, but you know, the music didn't. We might have to rewind a little bit, but we'll finish this, right? We get the dude's name. Me and Tor build a crate out of like, you know, and neither one of us is a carpenter. So it's this fucked up looking homemade Indiana Jones Ark of the Covenant crate on it that says, you know, Hellcat Records, you know, dude's name, care of, or whatever, attention, dude's name. Roger has no idea we're sending a crate. Like, he just knows that he gave Tor the dude's name.
Yeah.
So we ship it out there, and this is like the end of 2001, which may ring a few bells for people with fucking what happened in September of 2001.
Yeah.
Right. So the crate shows up. The dude calls Roger, like, what the fuck is this thing on our loading dock? And Roger has no idea. So that was the publicity stunt to try to get us noticed down there. And I know Tor met that dude at a Dropkicks show, like many years later, like, you know, 5 or 6 years later. And supposedly they were just like, yeah, we're all fans, but just like, your band is not saleable, you know, we can, you know, and I don't know.
It's like it's like the musicians band. Like,
Hellcat? I know Hellcat was a subsidiary of Epitaph, right?
Yeah.
Was Epitaph, had they been bought at that point? Like, I have no idea, did anyone have any control, or was at that point, had it all been sold to Sony or something where they're like, we would have been able to do that when, you know, but now it's not really we still run it, but we don't own it. So they expect, you know, like the realities of making money in music versus just making music
even in punk music and stuff.
Yeah. Like
business comes in, right?
It's funny because I never thought of this at the time, thinking that it was like a failure as an artist, but I definitely looked at music like as an artist.
Yeah.
Like, you should just go out and do the best, you know, whatever your idea is. Don't worry about whether it's saleable or fucking, you know, just do the best, or, you know, is that fad over, or, you know, do the best, whatever it is you can do. And if you get famous, good. If not, whatever, you know, and the music will be there, you know, for history to judge whether you were good or not. So, but that's not a great way to make money or make a living doing music, you know?
No, but that's what we were even talking about, I think, off mic earlier, is like, if some's doing what they want to do and it breaks and does good, well, that's not selling out. That's like you fucking won the lottery, right?
Some of the dudes you've had on that have managed, and I wish I knew names to drop here, but some of the guests you've had on that have managed to go from one band to another, you know, and it's good music, and they're able to like tour. Like, I'm just blown away. I'm like so impressed that they were, you know, me, like I said, I'm like a bottom feeder, just a local musician, like had my one band that kind of struck a glancing blow and then went back to just being a local, you know, having fun with my, like, with no regrets whatsoever. But like, that doesn't mean I'm not impressed with guys who can take it to that next level. You know, it was just such a different experience for us. And just a lot of it was the 8 characters, you know, 7 to 8 to, you know, so where we got to that tour, we got, you know, outed using Roger to get there. But Roger was definitely the only person I saw with like some juice that helped us out without asking for something in return.
I can tell you,
because there was some other industry type people, you know, not that it was anything out of the ordinary, but like that we did favors for and we never got the return favor. You know, because they didn't have to, because, you know, it's their, like, I understand why now. But, you know, just the, I think people, it's like, it's not unknown that Roger's a really stand-up guy. I barely know him.
No, but I can say Roger and Vinny are two, like, they're like legit dudes. Like, they're There's nothing. There's no pretense. It's like
right. No,
they give a shit. Yeah.
Distinctively remember talking to Vinny still. One of the times we played CBGBs, and he probably remembers me, like based on what you say. Like Vinny never forgets anyone. You know, I think I probably met him more than once, but I distinctly remember like a long conversation on the sidewalk once, and he probably remembers me.
Yeah.
Didn't you play in the?
Yeah. Oh yeah. He probably has a nickname for you or something. You know what I mean?
Slick, right?
Yeah. But why don't what about like just the logistics of touring with a piano, like loading in and loading out? I can't even imagine that. Like some of the venues.
Tor did some time working as a mover around that time when he was just getting started. So, yeah, like I said, super smart kid.
So Tor learned the skills that was necessary to keep the band on the road, like, whether it was mechanics or like moving.
I don't know if it was
on purpose or you said he had a genius level IQ. Maybe it was, some even subconsciously like.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he worked for a moving company called Death Wish.
Death Wish, that's what all the punk rock dudes worked for Death Wish back in the day.
So we had like a piano skid. We had some of the straps and shit to be able to mostly. And then Zach got into like, I don't know when Zach was another messenger. I don't think he and I were doing it at the same time, but the early days I was in the band, he was still a messenger. And then he transitioned to working at a piano store. So he learned how to legitimately fix pianos so he could fix his piano that he played. Yeah. And a lot of times with pianos, people are offering you free ones if you can come and get it. So I think we went through a couple touring pianos.
Yeah.
And he knew which ones were like the light ones that we could
use on the road.
Right. And then, like I said, we'll do a quick rewind to like the showmanship thing. Like that's what everyone remembers about the band. And it definitely, that was days when I was still in the audience.
Yeah.
When they, early days, Tor just starting singing, he's just going out there and screaming. Like he has no idea what he's doing and, smokes 3 packs a day. So a lot of times his voice didn't make it through the set. So like one of the songs on Fight Songs, one of the instrumentals is like a song Justin wrote with his band in high school or something, La Chupacabra. Like that song became a Kings of Nuthin song to try to pad the set out so that Torres could rest his voice,
I get you, yeah.
Spike sang one of his old songs Spike was in a band called the Royal Crowns up in Canada a couple of years before the better known Royal Crowns from Providence. One Greasy Corpse, which I think is a bonus vinyl only Fight Songs track. That's one of Spike's old songs from the Royal Crowns. That came about because of, Tor couldn't keep his voice together.
Yeah.
And that's where like Light and Shit on Fire, like, before the band actually, they had the dudes, right? They had the Berkeley guys, but they still didn't have they hadn't gelled as a team. So they still weren't that great at band. So all that goofiness and the pyrotechnics, which was all just lighter fluid. It was all just Roncinol Zippo fluid. So it really wasn't that dangerous, but it give you a jolt of adrenaline. Like you definitely felt heat, like you were, working. I mean, for guys like us that worked with acetylene torches, it's like you're at a show in a bar. So I can only imagine like people who were less rough around the edges than us, like the fires that they set on stages that barely stayed under control. Spike had kind of a project to break the drop ceiling in TTs that he started breaking it when he was playing in the Racketeers. And then he finally took it down at a Kings of Nuthin show.
Yeah.
Can't remember if that was right before I was in the band or like the first couple months I was in the band, but Spike knocked it down for whatever 10th time or something. And they just ripped it out. Like no more drop ceiling. You look at the sprinkler pipes, so, and then 2002 was when they burned down the nightclub in Providence. Yeah. So abrupt end to our pyrotechnics.
Yeah.
But Tor pushed for it so hard, and that's something I would get frustrated about. It's like, we don't need to do that shit anymore.
Yeah.
We have these amazing songs, for the most part, like other than me, right? Everyone can really play the shit.
Yeah.
So we don't need we just go out there, And the other thing that was kind of like a downside of making it to that level where like people love you, you're headlining. Like there were nights where we weren't, we're humans. Like you got on nights and off nights and the whole spectrum. And
every band has that.
Yeah. Some of the nights where we weren't that great, people went nuts anyway.
Yeah.
So that never happened to me. Like my earlier band, I was always playing nobody knew who the hell we were. So like every night we won over a new audience, you know? And that kind of came in handy when we were out of town with the Kings of Nuthin, because we were huge in Boston, and outside of Boston, very poorly known. You know, some of the times we went out to the West Coast, like nobody had heard of us other than the people who booked us.
Yeah.
You know, which we were desperate to break in out there, because that was where the rockabilly scene was still huger than it ever was. And it lasted longer, you know, and I mean, it's still going out there on a much smaller scale versus like around here, it's almost non-existent. Almost.
How did the Europe tour come about? And was that you guys headlining, or were you guys in support of somebody? Or was it like mixed?
That was just, that's another, I don't know any names, but MAD.
Yeah.
Really solid.
Mark.
Yeah. You know, they heard of us. I think it was because we got on Disaster. You know? So it wasn't a huge label, but it got us on a few we were hoping it would get us on people's radar, and it really didn't. But MAD was, you know, do you know that Hunter S. Thompson quote about the music industry?
I probably do.
I recently found out it's probably not actually a quote. It's probably someone took something he said about anyway, look up Hunter S. Thompson on the music industry. Scathing fucking. That was what I saw of most of the music industry, and I wanted nothing to do with it. My limited exposure, like at the lowest level that I was at. And, you know, those guys at MAD were nothing like that. They were the most straightforward, like honest dudes. And they were like, yeah, we think you guys will do well over here. You know, so we brought you over, and that tour we played some pretty big stages, like outdoor stages and stuff. And we played like coffee shops on the same tour.
Yeah. That's how Europe is. Like unless you're like a super big, you know.
And
I got that quote, by the way, too.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to read it, it's been debunked. It's not, apparently it's not a real quote, but I agree with this quote.
The music business is a cruel and shallow money trench, a long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free and good men die like dogs.
Right.
I get it.
That's pretty much, I saw that, you know, in the little, you know, I barely had my foot through the door, like even out of the guys in the bands. Like I didn't deal with that very often, but I was disgusted by a lot of that. And, you know, like I said, people who weren't like that, and, you know, the dudes in MAD, like we did that tour, and, you know, they had a ledger sheet. Like we sat down with them because we were near Berlin at the end of the tour, and went through, like, here's how much, you know, your van cost every day. This is what you're spending on diesel fuel. You know, this is what hotels cost when the club didn't put you up. And, you know, so you can see right here, we basically broke even. Yeah. This was like, we booked all this for you, and we're not really, you know, and it's like, wow, okay. You know, at the Birch Company over there, like, awesome. Like they printed up all the shit we wanted, so we didn't have to bring everything.
Yeah.
And we only had to pay for what we sold, because they kept what we didn't sell. They took it back and sold it on their website, which is like the polar opposite of what we were experiencing over here with anyone like booking. You know, if we had to have merch printed, like we had to pay for it up front, you know, and we had to guess like how many sizes whatever. Like, I was blown away by how different it was.
There's a much better, like, I don't know the word, like industry or mechanism for bands to tour out there. Because even with War Machine, like we had a merch company, and shout out to Contra, for doing the same thing. We only paid for what we used on the tour, and then they're selling the rest on the website. I think you got to take that thing off first. Oh no, there you go.
Where there's a will, there's a way. Yeah. So,
but yeah, there's much more of an industry around touring out there. Like, I don't say industry in the bad word of industry, but there's like mechanisms. Like there's like,
it's just different in a lot of good ways. Especially at the time, I know we were talking just the other day, and that's like, we keep saying that, but just for the audience, like you'll go 12 to 6 months without hearing from me. And then I randomly text you about some incredibly random shit, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So the fact that we were just talking about this, because you had Ray on the podcast, like our tour manager, huge Youth of Today fan, and I don't think they'd officially reunited at that point, and he was getting them next.
Yeah,
So there was a lot of bands that weren't technically together, but they were touring Europe because there was an audience, and you know that no matter who you were, they treated you like an artist. You know, everyone had tour riders where you had to be put up and fed and all that stuff. You were on your own in the States doing that stuff, and the drives were 10 times as long.
Yeah,
you know, we got the itinerary, and we're looking at like
your loading time.
Oh shit! We had to go from one side of the Germany to the other and back because we were like making a star pattern on Germany for a month straight, like until the first day, and we realized it takes 3 hours to drive across Germany. Oh, okay, no problem.
Yeah, because you're thinking like every country is the size of the states or whatever, and it's like, oh no, they're actually just the size of a single state.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. So, and then I mentioned the one story. Like, I definitely nothing has triggered like some of the wacky shit that we dealt with on the road to the level that I hoped it would. But the one thing I'll never forget I can always open with is something that happened in Germany and Tommy in the helicopter. And I brought this up like whenever it was 4 or 5 years ago when me and Tommy had that band, and he didn't even remember it happening. But it was at the end of the tour. We're driving, pulling to the rest area on the Autobahn, which is called the Rosthaus. And, Tommy's a ska kid, and he's like really into comedy, like really much less of a scumbag than the rest of us in the band. But he was just like, yeah, God. And he was playing one of the Trojan Records box sets on the van, because like CDs at this point, I don't think anyone had iPods yet. We're right on the cusp. And he's like, oh, I got the right CD in for the Rosthaus guy. He's like doing his little Tommy dance. So we all pile out. Everyone goes in, and I think it was me and Justice were the last ones out of the van, and a fucking helicopter lands like right where this bike is. Like we're parked next to the rest area.
It's like literally in the space next to you.
On the sidewalk in the grass in front of this place, a helicopter lands.
Yeah, but the space you're showing is almost like if you were in a parking lot, what the next space would be, or like a space and a half.
So the helicopter lands. It's like a medical helicopter. These EMTs jump out and run into the place, and we're like, wow, that was really fucking weird. But at this point, we're like in tour mode. We've been on the road, like. Not enough sleep, lots of shows, lots of really good German beer, weird food, kind of shrug something like that off. I'm in there hunting down Mountain Dew because they don't really have it in Europe, and I'm like addicted to the shit. Probably, didn't even consider until I was at least in my 30s that I was self-medicating for ADD with all this caffeine that I was addicted to. And they don't really have it over there, and it didn't taste the same, probably because they don't use corns. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'm looking for some caffeine fix, right? They have Afri-Cola, which has even more caffeine in Germany. Yeah. So, and Tommy comes out of the men's room, and the EMTs they're not like running after him. They're like walking behind him and kind of like grasping at him and like awkwardly missing. And it's like, just didn't. And at this point we're starting to say a few words in German and stuff, because a lot of it's the same. Like, milk is like Milch, and Zucker, Kaffee mit Zucker,
Yeah.
Didn't even cross my mind to try to say anything in German. I just blurted like, the fuck are you doing? And the dude jumps back. You're a mannequin. Yeah. Like, what the fuck are you doing trying to grab Tom? Didn't even have a chance to answer me. Like, there's like a diner counter, just like a truck stop here. Girl comes running out of the kitchen, like screaming at the top of her lungs, and the EMTs look at each other and like book it into the kitchen. I'm like, Tommy, what the fuck? Like, what was going on in that bathroom? He's like, oh, I don't know. I went to the bathroom and like those guys came in, and I'm still like listening to the music in my head, like the Rasta music, So they were trying to grab me, and I just like danced around them, Fuck, dude. Like, and that's like the oddball shit. Like, it isn't the Babylonian decadent, like lines of Coke and like, I mean, there was a lot of drinking, but not in any sort of, like drinking 40s on the side of the road drinking.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that was the Kings of Nuthin. It wasn't like Guns N' Roses type touring.
Yeah.
I told you there was going to be a story about malt liquor.
Yeah.
The first,
and there's a lot on some of these tours when you're playing a show every night, like you're just getting right back in the bus or the van or whatever and just going to the next one. So there's no time for any shenanigans. Well, this time, but it's not what everyone thinks.
When we were in the States, there was always time for shenanigans.
Yeah.
When we were in Europe, where it was an actual like schedule booked by someone else, there was a lot less time for shenanigans.
Yeah.
And there was less like we always had a lot of random fucking fans who would just walk up like they knew us and invite themselves into our bus and like end up staying with us, not at their house, just weird shit. So the first weekend I'm on the road, I think we missed this part. Did we miss my brand new saxophone getting destroyed?
No. Yeah, we missed it. You didn't talk about it. Yeah.
So, I'm broke. I literally, maybe I have $100 in the bank at any point because all of we're playing shows, so I can't even work 40 hours a week at $8 an hour. And I do have rent and stuff. It was before they hooked me up with the loft, which I still had to pay for it, but it was like about half what my apartment was. So we play in Philly and we went to, it was like a beer warehouse. I don't know if this is still the case in Philly. Like people don't know Mass is real weird with alcohol.
Yeah.
Philly, you could go into this warehouse thing and they only sold cases and they had one of those metal roller things, like in a factory assembly line to you could roll your cases up to the register. And I bought some Old English, some type of malt liquor. Cause it's like, a lot of times that's what I drank because it got you drunk twice, same price
couple
as beer.
Bucks. Yeah. Couple bucks. Yeah.
And, apparently to some of the other dudes in the band, that was foul. I should have been drinking Schlitzer. To me, it was all the same.
Yeah.
So we go to hit the show on South Street. Some guy's begging for a change in the median strip and we're in the Schlitz van. So they hand him might have even been two Old English tall boys.
Yeah.
So we drive off and he's on the median strip with his sign still, we'll work for whatever, please help, in desperation with the tall boy in his other hand.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure it was that weekend. The second night we played in Jersey, Tommy had to play a show with the Allstonians. So he left. So this was going to be my first time on the road with them. And I'm going to be the only horn.
Yeah.
And it's baritone, not tenor, which is a big difference. And I barely know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Barely, literally in the band for a month or something. And as we're setting up, I'm pretty sure one of the guys just wanted to get by me and I stepped out of their way and I fell into a hole in the stage and destroyed my sax.
Oh, Jesus.
Unplayable.
Yeah.
So get back to Boston.
Was that an elaborate scheme to get out of playing the show?
Yeah, if other than the monetary aspect.
Yeah.
We get back, I bring it back to the place I bought it, and I think, the dude just felt bad for me.
Yeah.
Because he get, more money on the credit card for another horn, but he was like, I can use some of the keys and stuff that weren't smashed off. If I ever have a repair, I can basically use this for parts.
Yeah.
So he gave me half of what I had paid for him a month earlier. It's a brand new horn.
Yeah.
He gave me half towards another one.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
But I don't think I paid that debt off until I quit the band.
Yeah.
Years later. So I think that just carried and I paid a lot of interest on it
over
the years.
You paid $7,000 for that.
Maybe.
No. But fuck yeah, man. What else? Any other standout things from your time in the band or
probably
about
that I'm blanking on at the time.
Because we're 2 hours in right here on this one, and this is the second one after we took a pause.
Right.
So we're almost 3 hours in.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, maybe, people have had enough.
Yeah. But
I wish I had come. So here's another thing, typical Kings of Nuthin that we were doing in the early days. We were kind of sick of typical dude at a rockabilly show at the time, standing there with his arms crossed, just kind of nodding,
Yeah.
So we'd play our hearts out, and these dudes would just be standing there. And then we'd get done and be like, dude, you were great. And I'm well, fuck, man.
You didn't show it. Yeah.
It's hard. We want that. I mean, anyone who's been in a band, it's the total is more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, and you feed off the energy. Yeah.
The
feedback loop. Yeah.
Exactly. So this started with a show. This will be good. This is enough capers to make up for my lack of remembering a lot of other capers. We're playing a show in Albany, New York with the Amazing Crowns. We drive out there. The alternator in the van, I think it was the Schlitz truck at this point, brakes on the way. We couldn't find a place that had it wasn't the actual alternator, it was the regulator.
Okay.
We couldn't find a place that had the regulator for it. So Tor knew enough about wiring, which wasn't a lot. He went to me with wiring questions. I was naturally better at that even back then, having no clue that I'd ever be an electrician someday.
Yeah.
But he basically rigged it up with a toggle switch. So, a voltage regulator is just a switch where at a certain voltage, it just shorts it to ground, and the excess power that the alternator is making is just looping through instead of charging the battery because the car doesn't need it. So he figured out, he knew where to put in a literal, toggle switch from AutoZone and one of us had to sit up front and on
it, yeah.
and then the alternator would start to overheat and squeal and we'd shut it off. And this was a 10-second loop, doing 50 all the way from Boston through Western. And it happened in the middle of nowhere near the border. People don't know. The Mass New York border, there's nothing.
Yeah. You might as well be in Alaska. Yeah.
Right. You're even past the touristy, mountainy Berkshires area. So we do that all the way to Albany. I don't think we got any of the food, but they had ordered these giant Sicilian pizzas for not us, maybe for the Crowns, but they were in the backstage. So it was another opening band, then us, and then the Crowns. And I think maybe we played and a bunch of us were just drinking instead of watching the Crowns play.
Yeah.
And Necro, supposedly, he always talked about when he was a kid in Texas that he had a breakdancing gang called the Tie-Dyed Monkeys. So he's sees the Sicilian pizza boxes. Hey, Mayan, Justice, check this shit out. Mayan, fucking gets out, breaks up a greasy giant Sicilian pizza box and is doing breakdance. He's not like the breakdancers you see in Central Park.
Yeah.
Maybe he was back in the day with the tie-dye monkeys.
He was a little rusty. Yeah.
We were all a little,
little hammered, a little rusted.
And
he wasn't at peak hand-eye coordination.
But the fucking Crowns come in, and that's one of those bands that we kind of looked up to because they were doing something similar and they got pretty big and they kind of got I think the deal with them, they kept signing to labels that went out of business, so they caught kind of some hard luck as far, because they were a few years earlier where they might have made it a bit further doing something retro while it was still the 90s and people would have been into it. But they were just I can still see their faces coming through the door, just like Jaws, what the fuck is there's hey, Justice, man, check out Sunwalk, man, check out his fucking Sunwalk. But that turned into, we started doing that in front of the clubs, as if we were headlining, we would just hang out front, before the opening band was even on, with cardboard, just doing ridiculous, and try to get all the fans to breakdance with us, and we were all awful.
But it was just an icebreaker.
It was a total icebreaker.
you can move around and
we would go in there and people would go nuts. And sometimes it would be a bar show. So, I'm playing a metal thing with a pointy thing in my mouth and, my microphone and horn is getting I'm worried about getting hurt by my instrument because of the crowd. But some of those were the funnest shows.
Yeah.
The biggest show I played, the Dropkicks hooked us up with one of their shows. And I remember it was us and Piebald. So the people who were there were a lot of people.
Aaron from Piebald was a Triumph Chopper guy.
Small world.
Yeah.
I don't think I know any of the guys from Piebald, but I ran the band's website back then, and I would scour the internet and try to copy and paste stuff to put on our websites were still a big deal for that kind of stuff.
Sure, yeah.
So there were no people who some people liked us. Because the Dropkicks this is before shipping up to Boston. This is when they were still, I think, the Blackout album.
Yeah, they were big, but a big punk band. We
thought they were rock stars, but we had no clue what was in store.
Yeah.
And they, we didn't play a ton with them. They don't have the control over who they play with like you think they would if you're not involved in the music scene. But not a lot of people liked us and Piebald. They liked Piebald. So it was kind of funny, but it was.
I can see more crossover between you and Dropkicks than you and Piebald. Yeah,
well,
for sure.
Or if any crossover between the Dropkicks and Piebald, they're probably not going to dig us too.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to be. We had our friend Amy we paid for her to get one of those motor drives for her camera to try to, there's just one of Tor's great ideas that didn't work out. He wanted Spike to smash a bass on stage, just like the London Calling cover. And she was supposed to try to get it, and like it didn't work. It didn't work at all. We didn't get the shot. So, but to me, that was
big upright bass for nothing.
Yeah. Well, he had like 3.
Okay.
So there was one that was like in the worst shape out of the 3 that he owned. Another one broke mid-show, and I don't know what made me think I could fix it at the time, but I was like, Spike, give it to me. Bring it. I had that. Bring it to my loft, and I fixed this bass for him. Like, put these big lag bolts through the neck, which I'd like never done anything like that before. But for some reason, I thought I could, and I think he still plays that bass, so I guess it worked.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other thing like that I feel bad about with the Dropkick Murphys is around the same time they invited us to their music video shoot in Southie. It was the one that Lenny and Shelley were like the couple in.
Yeah.
They invited like a lot of musicians to be the crowd, and it just, like it was not my scene at all. And Tor was like insistent that we wear our suits, like the black suit with a white tie, like, and I was not into that idea. Like, I don't know if anyone gave a fuck from the Dropkick scam. Maybe they were like, oh no, like then people will know that the Kings of Nuthin, I wasn't sure we should be trying to glom onto their video that way. But I can just tell you that if you're ever in a music video like that and you want to make sure that you don't make the final cut of the video, if you look directly into the camera and dance like Snoop Dogg, you won't make the final cut.
But
and I kind of feel bad about doing that, because like those dudes were nothing but nice to us, like trying to hook us up, and I'm being a dick, like dancing like Snoop Dogg. And,
you guys were known for breakdancing and stuff. So
true. No, but like the look on the camera guy's face, like he'd pan across and then like me again, he's like, fuck this fucking guy again.
Yeah.
Fucking skinny white Elvis looking motherfucker.
So what happened at the end,
For me, it was pretty tough, like financially. Because you need that musician job where you can like tell them you're going on the road and
come back and still have a job. Yeah.
And for me, that was that security job, which then became my home, and I was struggling to make enough money. Like the 3 years I toured, I spent religiously, I spent $20 a week on groceries.
Yeah.
So not to dwell on it too much. I was kind of getting sick of like chasing fame instead of just like, let's just be the Kings of Nuthin. Let the cards fall where they may, instead of, well, we got to try to do this. We got to, even right down to like when the tour was like hell-bent, when that bus finally kicked the bucket on us, that we needed to get like a van, like a regular band van and a trailer, just like some of the other bands we were friends, I think in his mind, if we ever met someone in the industry that, we would seem more like a real band. Like, which
I don't know, man.
weird,
I think like the Schlitz truck is more character.
Well, I mean, our label insisted that be the album cover for Fight Songs. Cause and this was some European guy. It wasn't the guy that started Bomp. It was a different guy that ran the Disaster, because that was supposed to be Dwayne Peters' label. And I mean, if anyone knows anything about Dwayne, like it's not surprising the way things turned out.
Sure.
As much as I'm like a huge fan of, I didn't even know how much a fan I was of his skating until years later. Black Label put out like a documentary on his life. Yeah. But the bonus content, if anyone can find the Black Label DVD on Dwayne Peters, they have all this, like, it's got to be Super 8 film footage of dudes skating contests in the late 70s and early 80s. It's like, I think it's the only footage of Jay Smith doing laybacks. Like, there's that famous, why am I spacing on the dude's name? The guy that did the Beastie Boys and the photographer dude.
Glenn Friedman.
Yeah, there's a famous, like, sequence of Jay Smith.
Yeah.
Like, there's film of him. And it's not on YouTube. Like, you got to find this DVD. And you can see Jay Smith do laybacks. You see Shogo, and Dwayne like kills it on this stuff. And I had never seen him skate back in the 80s. Like, so I didn't even know what a fan I was when we were like label mates, But yeah, not surprising that it kind of fizzled,
Sure. Yeah.
better and for worse. Like he is what he is,
Yeah.
So yeah. And a couple of the new songs, I still feel bad about this because probably my two least favorite songs on, so what happened, the album that came out last, Old Habits, they actually recorded that right after Fight Songs. Not right after, but after. So a bunch of us quit around the same, like four of the 8 quit around the same time as me for various similar, but
Yeah.
And that's when they went in and recorded Old Habits. And then because they were doing so much better in Europe than they were in the States, I don't know if it was MAD or the label, people like you, but they were like, we really need you to do a album that's like cover songs, half covers, and that's the punk rock rhythm and blues, AKA over the counter culture. Cause they thought with the English as a second language, people wouldn't, I don't know. It's whatever. I think people would have got it. I do like the title over the counter culture, but so that came out first, but they actually recorded it later. So some of the I only heard maybe 2 songs that would have been on Old Habits, and they're probably my least favorite songs on the record. Yeah. And I feel bad because I'm pretty sure I talked to Zach about it at some point, and he was kind of like, I don't know, not pissed at me, but like he's doing his best, trying to write the best shit he can. For me to be like, quit the band, and that was far from the only thing, but I was just like, I thought it was maybe an attempt to try to like sound pop punk or something, which was just like, that's not only is it not me, but it's not going to work, and whatever. Like,
so there was just a lot of,
it's not like, it's not like they proved me wrong, they put that record out and it's great. Those are probably my 2 least favorite songs, but the record as a whole is killer, and then so is Over the Counter Culture, even though I'm sure they weren't big into covers, a lot of them are really good. Like I really like the Anti-Nowhere League song they did.
Yeah.
And then here's another thing, like because I was talking to Spike about this recently, middle age recently. Because I was talking about us covering Stiff Little Fingers and how that came about. One of those weekends, it might have been the same weekend that Danny was singing at the Rockabilly Jam. Like I'm riding in Tor's car after being out all night, and he's playing Stiff Little Fingers, and Barbed Wire Love comes on, and he's like, yeah, we're going to do this. This is perfect for us. Like it's before I'm in the band, obviously Danny's still alive. It's like, yeah, check it out. Like the doo-wop breakdown in the middle of the song and everything. And I was like, dude, it's fucking perfect. Like, and I never thought of it, So 2 years go by, probably only a year. Seems like a long time, but I'm in the band and I'm like, hey, whatever happened to Barbed Wire Love? Like, let's start learning it. So we start learning it and everyone's drinking and goofing off and like, this is too hard. Let's do something easier. Let's do Here We Are Nowhere. And I'm telling Spike this, like, if I want to convey things that were frustrating about being like, wild, like largely fun.
Yeah.
Raucous, like good time, rock and roll band. But like, how could you be frustrated? Well, it's just stupid shit like that where I thought we could have been so much more.
Sometimes it's herding cats. Yeah.
But just like I said, Spike was like a little upset at first. He's like, oh, but that was my idea to do Here We Are Nowhere. And I was like, no, I mean, it was cool. We played it for years, but imagine if we had done Barbed Wire Love. That would have been fucking epic. And he's like, yeah, you're right. It would have been epic. And it's like, stuff like that. Not that it was all. And I think in some ways, I was looking back at like the band with my little brother and Gardner, where there was like zero drama.
Yeah.
Like we just show up and play. And we didn't get the big shows and like, but I was, and definitely. And I knew, I was frazzled. Like I wasn't thinking clearly. I definitely was like, I'm going to take a break from music. And I did for, it might have even been years before I started looking into like, but I just thought, like, you know what? We looked up that Hunter Thompson quote, like making money in music. It's just not for guys like me.
Yeah.
And there are people that can do music that I like. That's good. They make it work. But if I'm going to do music going forward, it's actually going to be less about the music and more like I want to be in a band with my friends. And so the first band,
like a fun.
Yeah. Not that I didn't like the guys in the Kings of Nuthin. But, you know, so what ended up happening, I mean, you kind of know because it's around the time I met you, but my old roommate, Vadim, who was a huge record collector, like music nut, but like never touched an instrument or anything in his life, like out of the blue was like, I'm going to start a band. I'm like, all right, what are you going to play? Oh, I'm going to sing. Like, what? Yeah. Can you sing? Like, so fast forward, he tricked me and, you know, the guy I used to play with, Gardner. He told Gardner I was already in. He told me Gardner was already in. So we agreed, like, but it was, you know, my main point of pride with that band, like when the Abbey first started, we were supposed to play a show there with the Conks. My surf band, Spectre 13 was, and then the show, Bob he thought he was going to be able to pick the opening bands and he couldn't. And then my brother went off to college and decided he didn't want to stay in the band while he was in college. So that band broke up.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to play the Abbey like at the ground floor level. And then not long after, I'm in the Kings of Nuthin, and they played the Abbey once. They couldn't fit on the stage, but they were too popular to play that venue. And most of the shows I was going to see when I was playing in the Kings of Nuthin were at the Abbey. You know, like you were talking about when I mean, that was such a cool venue. Yeah. And a lot of cool bands played there. So
I remember seeing the Kings at the Paradise.
Yeah, we were just talking about it when we were there the other night, when the Templars played.
Yeah.
Because I haven't been to even that many shows at the Paradise, but it's a weird, we did one show, we were on the main stage, and I will never forget the show we did because it was like Social D, but we weren't actually playing. We were in the fucking front room. We were like an after party in the front room that most of the people there didn't know happened. So it was like a weird, and that was actually, all right, it's a weird, it's not like a crazy Kings of Nuthin story, but I was at the merch table and some girl who knew who I was, like knew me as Matt, not as Slick, like came up and said hi to me. And I, to this day, don't know who it was.
Yeah.
Like must have been someone from when I was a lot younger that I didn't recognize because I hadn't seen in so long, but she got pissed and left. So like for the rest of my life, I'm probably never going to forget that experience. So whoever that was, like touche, like I'm sorry I didn't recognize you, but you made your point. Like I'm never going to forget that moment.
So here's a point of like, do you remember in the back room of the Paradise at that show, Poncho being there?
No.
Because me and
Social
Poncho.
Distortion in that show?
No, the Kings of Nuthin.
I think another time we played with like Out Cold and C60. Was it that night?
I don't remember, but there was one night where me and Poncho were hanging out in the back room.
No.
At that,
I don't remember you did.
Yeah. And that's would have been funny because if you remember Poncho, I'd be like, I was the other dude that was there.
I don't remember seeing him there, but I like barely crossed paths with him through the bike messenger days.
Yeah.
Like, mutual friends and knew nothing about him. And, you know, he's a pretty scary dude.
No, like, just fun. But yeah, no, I'm just,
but like, I think I would have recognized him.
Yeah.
So maybe I didn't see you two at all.
Yeah. Or maybe you were at like merch table or something or
Very, very likely. Yeah. I mean, there was another show. I don't want to get into like too much shit talking, but it didn't go well. And basically someone who we thought was opening for us decided to headline. We were like on the bill as headlining.
Yeah.
We were just like, you know, fuck it. Like it's their call, you know?
Yeah.
But it was at the Middle East downstairs too. And it was sold out. So it was a lot of fucking people. So as always, I'm at the merch table and our fans just going by, what the fuck? Who do they think? Like, I'm just like, whatever, don't worry about it. Thank you for your support. But these are the breaks.
Yeah.
Like we're the Kings of Nuthin. We're not fucking, we're not that kind of band.
Yeah.
You know, that just reminded me of another night at the Middle East downstairs. There was a band in the 90s. I saw them a bunch of times. They're pretty entertaining, like in a not take them too seriously manner. This surf band called The Strange Men. They had like crazy outfits that they wore and stuff. And
I don't remember.
They headlined a night that the Kings of Nuthin opened. And I think it was like the end of their popularity arc. Yeah. Because they got really big for a year or two. And like the place was absolutely like Kings were opening.
Yeah.
I was there. Like I probably drove down because I was living with my parents and like any excuse to get out of there. And I remember Tor going on stage, you know, we're the Kings of Nuthin, and this is our Kingdom of Nuthin. Because it was like literally 2 bartenders and me.
Yeah.
Like, that was the whole Middle East downstairs. Like,
Yeah.
And it barely filled up for the headliners, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
Speaking of the Middle East,
Yeah.
source of most of my hearing damage.
Yeah.
Standing in front of the speakers on the right.
It's a very adequate sound system, volume wise down there. Yeah.
So that reminds me of another thing. You want to hear about my irrational pet peeve?
Okay.
Because I know about yours.
Yeah. I'm so upset. I can't believe we already talked about those because we were like just kicking around ideas the other day on, we have like a separate M4 group text like, oh, we're doing the next one. Like,
yeah, I don't remember exactly. You talked about it in an M4 or something.
I did.
It was me being,
I have 2.
Former sax player of the Kings of Nuthin. That's something I'm going to squirrel away and try to use against you. So,
I have
mine,
2.
my irrational pet peeve
Yeah.
is people standing on the side of the stage when a band is playing.
Really?
Yeah. Like it like goes back to like fresh-faced 17-year-old kid, freshman at Mass Art, seeing bands at the Rat. Like, if you were really into this band, you'd be down here with the people, like that irrational fucking attitude. Like anytime I would like be going nuts out of my mind, having the time of my life to a band and seeing people just standing there on stage, like be like, it's totally irrational. It actually, it doesn't bother me now, but it probably only stopped bothering me less than 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm 46, so.
Mine still bothers me. Both of them. Yeah. Did I talk about the other one? It involved certain types of actors.
No, maybe
not. I'll save that one. If you guys want to hear about that, save that for the next. I'm
next
saving
M4.
For the M4. I'll tell you about it off mic.
Well, I'm glad I helped contribute to an M4.
Yeah. All right. Well, dude, I think we're like over 3 hours in. We should probably wrap it up.
I feel like there wasn't enough shenanigans to convey what the band really was, but we must have been talking about something. If it's been this,
well, you were giving like a breakdown of the history of everything, and I think that's going to be it's important stuff to document. Like, you know what I mean, and for Boston music history and just music history, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I think it's cool the way they pulled that band out of, like, if you could have seen the progression from the Saturday Night Specials to the Blackouts to the Kings of Nuthin,
Yeah.
And just, like, at least the names are out there. A few of the people that, didn't make it to the lineup like Ray and Mr. Green, but still contributed, Hopefully that's cool, and have my insider outsider take.
Is there still like a Kings of Nuthin website or anything where people
for the band? There is definitely a Facebook page. Like, how much I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I know they have an Instagram page that I think it's Kings of Nuthin the band.
Okay.
But I don't think there's a whole lot going on.
Yeah.
Because I joke about how the fact that every band that's ever existed has reunited and is currently touring.
Yeah.
But, not to belittle like a tragedy, but, it's kind of cool that we can.
Yeah,
You had to see us back then.
Yeah.
Hopefully the night you saw us was a good night, because I know they weren't all good nights.
Yeah.
But, that's cool to have been part of, because that's real.
And that's in no way belittling a tragedy. That's like almost like preserving a legacy.
Well, plus I was telling you the other day, like me and Lenny's book club, unbeknownst, like he's posting on Instagram what he's reading, and it's literally, and one of which was the Tao Te Ching, and the only constant being change. And like, I'm reading that for a reason. I'm reading it pretty late in life, but it's because it's like things I've thought that I couldn't put into words, and along the lines of that kind of Tao thing. Like, you know what, that was a thing that existed then, and it was really cool, and
it was for then.
Yeah. So it is kind of cool that we can't attempt to recreate it, because even if we were still good, it wouldn't be the same.
Yeah.
It would be, we'd have to do things differently, because you can't, like, shit, if I try to play my old surf songs that I wrote, like, it's physically difficult for me to play them.
Sure. And also things that happen when you're in your 20s, like if you're trying to do that in your 40s or 50s.
Oh, it's you got to almost relearn it. Like the bands that are still sounding good.
Plus, all the things that made the magic was like you guys drinking 40s in the back of the van while fucking instruments are hitting you in the head. You ain't going to do that when you're 50. Like, you know what I mean? Like you would when you're 22. You know what I mean? Like,
no, definitely.
And that stuff, like, and so, but yeah, man. Well, fuck yeah, dude. I think this is good, and I think we should, we'll wrap this up. But We should do another one sometime because there's other stuff I want to get into it with you about, but I ain't going to start it right now because I know you start talking.
Oh, the stuff that the world government's going to kill me over?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.